Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cologne-drenched, wine-soaked, toga-slipping madness of Roman nightlife. Not the gladiator part, not the Caesar salad part. I'm talking about what actually happened when the sun set in ancient Rome and your average Roman citizen decided to throw dignity out the atrium window. So before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Someone is definitely horizontal at 2:14 a.m., wearing socks and rethinking their life. You're not alone. Now, dim those lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get under your blanket like a lazy Roman under a stolen woolen toga. And just for tonight, let's ask the important, deeply intellectual questions history textbooks were too afraid to ask. Did ancient Romans really party like it was 99 BC? Was wine just fancy grape juice, or a mild hallucinogen in a clay jug? What was considered a hot date in Rome, and did it involve goats, lyres, or interpretive poetry? Who cleaned up after the vomitorium? And yes, was there a vomitorium? Could you survive an evening at a Roman tavern without ending up robbed, poisoned, or married? Tonight, you'll find out. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Rome, somewhere between 100 and 200 amperes. D. You're wearing a questionable tunic. Your breath smells like olives and regret. And you can already hear the drums of a street performance echoing from 3 blocks over. The party's started, and you're already late. As the sun dips below the horizon, Roman streets come alive like a toga-wrapped fever dream. You hear the clang of sandals, the squeak of wooden carts, and the not-so-gentle shouting of your neighbor arguing over olive oil. This isn't bedtime, it's pre-game. The Romans didn't do quiet evenings, not unless they were dead, exiled, or uninvited to the dinner party. When the last golden streaks of sun slid behind the tiled rooftops, it wasn't a cue to settle down, it was a signal to get weird. This was when the bakeries cooled, the bathhouses emptied, and the really questionable decisions began. You're in the heart of the Subura, the densely packed, scandalously loud neighborhood where Rome's real nightlife flourishes. Forget about marble columns and poetic speeches. Down here it's all sweat, song, and the unmistakable smell of warm garum sauce slowly dying in the evening heat. As you shuffle along the cobblestones, your sandals slapping the street like 2 wet pieces of flatbread, you pass under flickering oil lamps that light the way just enough to help you trip over something. Possibly a bucket, possibly a sleeping man named Gaius, who peaked in 42 amperes. D. Your ears pick up the first clues that the night is alive. A flute in the distance, the rhythmic beat of a hand drum, laughter too loud, too early, a donkey braying because someone tried to ride it home from the bathhouse. These are the gentle lullabies of Roman nightlife. By now, every vendor who doesn't sell wine, olives, or loosely defined snacks is packing up. Their stalls close not with reverence, but with a resigned grunt and the sound of wooden shutters slamming. But the tavern doors, they're swinging wide open, like they've been waiting all day to be chaotic. And they have. You turn a corner, and suddenly the street is pulsing. Not metaphorically. It's literally vibrating from the crowd pressed together like grapes about to become wine. Everyone's outside. Mothers balancing babies on hips, old men yelling about the price of bread, teens wearing tunics far too short for decency and just short enough for drama. It's not just humans out here either. Dogs roam freely, sniffing corners and stealing meat off unattended trays. Cats dart under tables like tiny burglars with an agenda. Someone's parrot is perched on a wine barrel shouting, "Ave," every time a cup is lifted. It's unclear who taught it that. It's very clear that it's proud of it. But here's the real kicker. Romans didn't go out late, not in the modern sense. No 11 p.m. club entrances, or 2 a.m. burrito runs. Their idea of nightlife started just after sundown and ran until the oil lamps sputtered out or someone passed out in the fountain, which, to be fair, was usually around the same time. If you were wealthy, your evening started in a dining room the size of a modern apartment complex, surrounded by friends, hangers-on, and at least one extremely bored poet hired to recite verses about how beautiful your eyebrows are. If you were poor, well, welcome to the street party. The food's worse, but the stories are better. And let's not forget the smells. Oh, the smells. There's the sweet scent of fried dormice from a passing food stall, the tang of fermented fish sauce oozing from a tavern, and the undeniable funk of a city that hasn't invented plumbing the way you're used to. It's a nose adventure. Some would say assault. Still, there's something enchanting about it. The soft glow of lanterns bouncing off stone walls. The chatter of 100 conversations overlapping like waves in a very talkative ocean. Somewhere, someone is singing off-key about the moon. Somewhere else, two men are yelling about whether gladiators or chariot racers are superior athletes. Neither are sober. The sky above shifts from orange to purple to that deep, inky black that makes the stars pop like ancient paparazzi. And just as you're starting to wonder where the line between party and riot begins, a trumpet sounds from a balcony. It's probably someone's uncle. It's probably also the 4th time he's done this week. You pause. Take it all in. This isn't just noise. It's ritual. The chaos is comforting in its familiarity. This is how Romans unwind, by winding up like spinning tops made of ego, grape juice, and social commentary. The night is young. The streets are alive. And you, toga slightly askew, are officially part of it. So go ahead, follow the music. Accept the cup of wine from a stranger who calls you brother, even though you've never seen him before. Watch a one-man puppet show performed on the back of a goat cart. Laugh too loud, walk too slow, trip on a cobblestone and pretend it was a dance move. Because here, as the sun slips away and the night takes the stage, you're not just a Roman citizen. You're the main character in a toga-draped fever dream, and it's just getting started. You walk into a popina, Rome's version of a dive bar, and the smell hits you first. It's a mix of sweat, sour wine, mystery meat, and someone who hasn't changed their tunic since Caligula. Congratulations, you're in the heart of Roman nightlife. There's no welcome sign, no bouncer, no cleverly named cocktail list. Just a curtain flapping in the doorway, and the low, ambient hum of bad decisions being made in Latin. The floor is sticky. With what? Nobody knows. Probably wine, possibly blood, maybe a little of both and whatever's left of last week's goat stew. Your feet make a wet sort of noise as you step in the universal sound of, I shouldn't be here, but I've already committed. The air inside is thick and moist in a way that suggests no one has opened a window since the Republic fell. It's hot, it's loud, and someone is yelling about a chariot race that happened 3 days ago like it's a fresh personal betrayal. Welcome to the Popina, the rowdy, smoky, glorified basement that doubles as Rome's favorite hangout and unofficial community complaints office. Let's set the scene. The furniture is either broken or about to be. You're sitting on a 3-legged stool propped up by sheer optimism. The tables are carved with centuries of graffiti, some of it poetic, most of it anatomical. In one corner, a dice game is underway, and the tension is thicker than the wine. Someone just lost a week's wages. Someone else is laughing too hard. You're not entirely sure if that dagger on the table is decorative or about to be used in a very dramatic round of charades. The Popina isn't just for drinking. It's a theatre of chaos, a place to gossip, gamble, shout, flirt, cry, and occasionally wake up face down in a bowl of lentils. Patrons range from sweaty labourers and surly sailors to the one weird guy who claims he once made eye contact with the emperor and lived to tell the tale. He's telling it now, again, for the 6th time. And the drinks? Ah, yes. You'd think wine would be the saving grace. You'd be wrong. Roman wine is complicated. It's usually served warm. It's almost always diluted with water, unless you're in the mood for blackout regret. And it's stored in clay jugs that may or may not have been rinsed since Nero's birthday bash. If you're lucky, you'll get a mix that only vaguely reminds you of grapes. If you're unlucky, it tastes like old vinegar had a midlife crisis and decided to pursue fermentation as a hobby. To mask the quality, tavern owners often add herbs or spices. Cinnamon if they're fancy, chalk or lead if they're cheap and morally flexible. But it works. After 3 cups, your standards drop, your Latin gets worse, and suddenly you're singing along with a man whose only instrument is slapping his belly in rhythm. Food is also available, though available might be overstating it. The menu, if there is one, usually includes pickled vegetables, boiled chickpeas, and something brown in a bowl that no one's asked about since 73 amperes. Most patrons don't care. They're not here for cuisine. They're here to shout at their friends while spitting olive pits onto the floor with righteous passion. There's no table service. If you want something, you yell for the cowpo, the tavern keeper, who may or may not acknowledge your existence depending on how much you've tipped in the past or how recently you insulted his mother. He's missing 2 teeth, moves with the speed of an overworked ox, and has the deeply haunted eyes of someone who's seen 5 bar fights and a goat birth in the same week. Every now and then, a lupernaria, a working girl, drifts through the room, trailing perfume and subtle negotiation. Sex work is legal, and taverns are prime hunting ground. Deals are made with a nod and a glance. Privacy is theoretical. If you head to the back room, don't expect mood lighting. Expect a curtain and a vague promise of 10 minutes, no refunds. In the meantime, more wine is flowing. Dice are clattering. The man next to you is either asleep or very deeply contemplating his shoelaces. You lean back, take another sip of the suspiciously cloudy house red, and try not to think too hard about the fact that there's a live chicken standing on the bar. No one questions it. It's probably part of the entertainment. And just when you think it can't get weirder, a local poet stands up on a wobbly table and begins to loudly recite a very dramatic love poem to someone named Antonia. You assume it's the woman at the next table. She throws a piece of bread at his face. It is not well received. A scuffle breaks out. Someone throws a jug. Someone else applauds. It's beautiful. It's barbaric. It's 100% Roman. Taverns weren't polite. They weren't refined. But they were democratic. Everyone was equal in a popina, equally drunk, equally loud, and equally likely to end the night missing a sandal and covered in someone else's wine. So you raise your cup to the chaos, to the sweaty, strange, wonderful mess of Roman nightlife. Because in this tiny, grimy, candlelit room, you're not a time traveler from the future. You're just another patron, another voice in the din. And maybe, just maybe, you're the next person to stand on a table and recite poetry no one asked for. Cheers. Roman wine isn't your smooth, sophisticated Pinot. It's cheap, sweet, and likely watered down unless you're rich, in which case it's just bad in a different font. You drink it anyway. It's safer than the water, and frankly you stop tasting it after cup 3. See, in ancient Rome, wine wasn't so much a luxury as it was a necessary evil like taxes or your cousin who always shows up uninvited. Everyone drank it. Children drank it. The elderly drank it. The Senate probably debated policy while tipsy on the stuff. Not because Romans had a particularly deep love for wine, but because the other option was death by dysentery in liquid form. Water, in Rome, was suspicious at best, and actively murderous at worst. Wine, on the other hand, might make you go blind eventually, but at least it had the decency to kill bacteria first. So yes, you drank wine. You drank it daily, hourly, and possibly by accident, but you also never drank it straight. That was considered barbaric, literally. If you refused to mix your wine with water, you were either a foreigner or trying to get punched. Civilized Romans always diluted their wine with water, sometimes in a 1-to-3 ratio, which means by the time your cup was full, you were sipping something that tasted like grape tears and disappointment. Unless, of course, you were poor, in which case, you didn't bother with the diluted part. You bought whatever was cheapest, possibly fermented in a boot, and drank it like your dignity had already left the party. It was thick, syrupy, acidic, and somehow still flammable. A common nickname for this stuff? Vinum operarium, or labourer's wine, which is Latin for get ready to regret this. And then there was posca, a Roman favourite made from sour wine mixed with water, vinegar, and sometimes herbs. It was essentially what happens when your wine goes bad, you can't afford better wine, and you convince yourself it's a health drink. Roman soldiers drank it like Gatorade. They claimed it restored energy and morale. In truth, it just lowered their standards until marching 20 miles in full armour felt like a reasonable life choice. Wealthier Romans, of course, had access to higher-end options-aged wines from Greece, or the famed Falernian, which was so strong it could strip paint. These were the vintages poets wrote sonnets about, though to be fair, those poets were often broke and easily bribed. Rich patrons would infuse their wine with everything from honey to seawater to crushed herbs, creating flavors that screamed, "I have money, and no one says no to me." Some even added chalk to make the wine look less cloudy. Others used lead, yes, actual lead to sweeten the taste. And this wasn't considered weird. It was considered innovative. Tastes like brain damage was apparently not a red flag at Roman dinner parties. Historians now suspect that Rome's ruling class may have slowly poisoned themselves with their own wine preferences. Honestly, if your emperor thought he was a god and tried to appoint his horse to the Senate, a little lead in the cup starts to make sense. Let's talk serving. You didn't pour wine straight from a bottle into a glass. No, that would be too simple. Wine was ladled out of large mixing bowls called craters, and it was typically served in small cups that somehow required 3 servants to operate. One held the jug, one held the cup, and one just kind of stood there looking decorative. At banquets, the wine wasn't just for drinking. It was an event. The host decided how strong it was, how often it flowed, and how quickly the guests regretted attending. There were rules, too, like the symposium, a drinking ritual where conversation, music, and competitive poetry reading were all encouraged. Until someone threw up. Then it was intermission. And remember, this is the ancient world. There's no refrigeration, no corks, no climate, controlled cellars. Wine aged in clay jars, sealed with resin and hope. If you opened a jug and it fizzed, well, surprise, it's fizzy now. Just swirl it and pretend you meant to do that. The funny part? Romans weren't trying to get smashed. Not really. Public drunkenness was frowned upon. A true Roman was supposed to drink with restraint, dignity, and at least one eyebrow raised in judgment. Of course, that didn't stop them from drinking 6 cups in a row while reciting erotic poetry to a bored dinner guest named Claudia. It was a culture of moderation, expressed immoderately. Still, the wine was everywhere. Taverns, bathhouses, temples, ships, marketplaces. Even funeral rites included a generous pour for the dearly departed. Because if Grandma had to be carried across the River Styx, the least you could do was make sure she arrived tipsy. And yes, the wine burned twice. Once on the way down, acidic, bitter, and mysteriously crunchy, and once the next morning, when your stomach reminded you that Roman vintage is Latin for mild internal collapse. Hangovers were brutal, unpredictable, and made worse by the fact that ancient Romans didn't have Tylenol. Just cold bread, a sad nap, and maybe a vague prayer to Bacchus, god of wine and deeply questionable decisions. So you take another sip. Your third, your fifth. Time is slippery now. The wine is warm, the night is loud, and someone across the room just raised a toast to the gods, the Republic, and the guy who brought the figs. You join in, because why not? You're in Rome, your cup is full, the water is terrifying, and frankly, after 5 sips, everything tastes fine. The entertainment begins in the streets. One guy juggles flaming sticks. Another recites poetry in Latin while weeping. A third just eats rocks. No one's sure if he's part of the show or just very committed to his personal brand. This is Roman nightlife in full swing. You're standing in the middle of a forum-turned carnival, where cobblestone becomes stage and your coins become tickets. There's no official program, no stage lights, just performers scattered across the city like very loud pigeons, each competing to be the weirdest, loudest, or least likely to be set on fire before midnight. First up, the jugglers. One man is spinning flaming sticks at a speed that suggests he either has divine protection or is deeply uninsured. He's barefoot. His tunic is suspiciously singed. A crowd has gathered, half in awe, half placing mental bets on whether this ends with applause or a very dramatic hair fire. The performer beams as the flames flicker inches from his face. You're not sure if this is talent or a nervous breakdown, but it's definitely captivating. Next to him is a man standing perfectly still, face painted white, holding a lyre. You think he's a statue. He is not. He suddenly bursts into a melancholy melody so haunting it makes you feel personally responsible for the fall of Troy. He doesn't blink. He doesn't smile. His song is about lost love, or olives, or possibly both. A woman nearby wipes a tear. A child throws him a coin. A donkey nearby brays in tune. Art, truly, is everywhere. Then there's the human rock-eater. You didn't think this was a thing, and yet, here you are, watching a shirtless man chew what may or may not be part of the Colosseum. The crowd alternates between horror and encouragement. Someone offers him wine. He declines, his mouth is full of gravel. You can't look away. Is this part of the act? Is he okay? Is this performance art or a cry for help? In the background, a group of children dance to a rhythm banged out on overturned amphorae. Their choreography is enthusiastic, if not entirely coordinated. A woman nearby is balancing on a rope tied between two balconies. She's not a professional, she's just bored and possibly wine drunk. Below her, a man plays panpipes with the intensity of someone who's been trying to impress the same three girls for a decade. None of them are paying attention. This is the soul of Rome after dark, chaotic, creative, and only loosely regulated. Street performance wasn't just tolerated, it was tradition. Rome was a city that loved a show, even if that show involved questionable nudity and a lute. And unlike the formal entertainment in theatres or amphitheatres, these street acts were raw, unscripted, and often wildly unpredictable, which is exactly why people loved them. You shuffle along to another crowd forming near the bathhouse steps. A storyteller is mid-tale, something about a demigod, a goat, and a truly unfortunate dinner party. He punctuates every sentence with dramatic arm gestures and just a little too much eye contact. He doesn't break character even when a dog pees on his sandal. That's dedication. You drop a coin in his basket. He bows and screams, "Thank you, noble patron," loud enough to wake the city's ancestors. Then, of course, there's that guy with the lyre. Every Roman block has one. He's perched on a crate, strumming like his life depends on it, serenading strangers with deeply emotional ballads that may or may not be improvised on the spot. You pause to listen. The song is about a fish. A very specific fish that betrayed him. You nod solemnly. We've all been there. Not every performance is poetic, though. Some are loud, some are mildly illegal, some are both. You turn a corner and nearly walk into a troupe of acrobats forming a human pyramid in the middle of the road. One man flips off the top and lands with all the grace of a startled goose. The audience erupts in cheers. Somewhere, a cart driver swears loudly because someone's donkey is now blocking traffic to watch. The donkey looks thrilled. Further down, two actors perform a comic sketch involving mistaken identity, a wine jug, and an absolutely scandalous fake mustache. The jokes are fast. The accents are questionable. And the punchline, a fart joke in perfect dactylic hexameter, brings the house down. You laugh despite yourself. You're learning Latin through stand-up comedy and bodily functions. It's surprisingly effective. But of course, not all attention is welcome. Behind one corner, a street magician attempts sleight of hand with more enthusiasm than skill. You watch as he disappears a coin by dropping it down his sleeve, where it promptly falls out onto the street. He glares at you. You pretend not to notice. He moves on to a chicken. You're not sure where this is going, but you leave before you find out. All the while, Roman guards patrol the area, half-heartedly pretending they're keeping order while secretly watching the juggler with the torches. One of them claps when a trick lands. The other sighs deeply, probably regretting his career choices. As the night deepens, the performances get weirder. Someone starts reciting love poems at a fountain. Another is walking around dressed as Mars, the god of war, holding a plucked chicken and preaching about honor. A mime begins to duel his own shadow. No one stops him. And somehow, it all works. Because this is Rome. A city where performance isn't reserved for grand stages. It spills into every alley, every forum, every tavern. Every citizen is a potential audience. Every performer, a philosopher with poor impulse control. So as you stand there, cup of warm wine in one hand, crumbs of mystery bread on your tunic, and torchlight flickering in your eyes, you realize something important. This is the entertainment capital of the ancient world. Not because of colosseums, not because of tragedy masks and marble statues, but because right now, in front of you, a man is balancing 3 jugs, reciting Virgil, and possibly threatening the moon, and somehow, you wouldn't have it any other way. At elite Roman dinner parties, you might be serenaded by professional musicians and terrified servants holding flutes like they're being judged, and they are, especially if they hit a wrong note while the host is chewing duck livers. Welcome to the upper crust of Roman society, where the wine flows like questionable promises and dinner parties are less about eating and more about orchestrated displays of wealth, status, and ego. You, lucky time traveler, have somehow landed a seat, or more accurately, a reclining position at one of these lavish affairs, sandwiched between a senator's brother-in-law and a woman who claims to have dated 3 consuls and a minor deity. But don't get too comfortable. You're being watched, not just by the host, who is silently judging your toga folds, but by a silent army of performers, each rehearsed, exhausted, and praying they don't mess up during the veal course. Entertainment in wealthy Roman homes wasn't casual. It was curated. Your average aristocrat didn't just want food, they wanted a show. And that show began the moment guests arrived. Before the first oyster was peeled or the first cup of Falernian was poured, the musicians would already be playing something light and festive, a melody to soften the awkward silence of new guests, pretending they'd never heard rumors about each other's gambling debts. The musicians were often slaves or hired performers, lute players, harpists, flute blowers, percussionists armed with tiny drums and even tinier patience. These weren't hobbyists. They were human muzak with deeply complicated contracts and the ever-present risk of being slapped mid-performance because someone thought they played that one note just a little too Greek. And, oh, the pressure. If the host was powerful, every second of entertainment had to reflect their superiority, which meant the band had to be flawless, the singing had to be haunting, and the timing had to be divine literally, if the host was particularly self-important and wanted his entrance timed with a thunderclap and a rising lyre solo. Now picture the flautist, eyes darting between their music and the host's facial expression, hands shaking, sweat beading under a scratchy wool tunic that's 2 sizes too big because tailoring is for senators. One wrong breath, one squeaky note, while Lucius is mid-rant about military reforms, and boom, demotion from flute duty to vomitorium cleaning duty. That's a real demotion. That's a real room. Sometimes these bands were instrumental only, but the best houses brought in singers. And by singers, we mean vocal slaves who were trained from childhood to hit soprano notes high enough to terrify dogs. They would stand near the dining couches, singing love songs, epic tales, or even musical insults aimed at rival guests depending on the mood. Imagine karaoke night, but everyone has a knife and a political agenda, and you weren't just passively listening. No, that would be too easy. You were expected to respond. Nod thoughtfully, snap politely, occasionally weep if the song mentioned a tragic fish. If you failed to react, the host might assume you lacked culture or worse, accuse you of siding with the wrong poetic school. A fatal faux pas in literary circles, where quoting Virgil incorrectly was only slightly less offensive than stealing someone's amphorae. Of course, not all performances were serious. Sometimes, the entertainment took a sudden, chaotic left turn, from gentle harp music to a full-on interpretive dance involving feathers, oil, and a very committed man pretending to be a satyr. You're not sure if it's art, a seizure, or both, but the host is laughing, so you do too, loudly, just in case. And let's not forget the surprise guests. Every good Roman host loved a novelty act, a blindfolded lyre player, a boy who could mimic bird calls so accurately it caused real birds to fly into the dining hall, or an old man who recited the entire Aeneid backwards while standing on a goat. These were the ancient world's talent shows, only with more sandals and slightly higher chances of injury. Sometimes, guests were even encouraged to perform themselves. That's right. After the 6th cup of wine, a tipsy senator might attempt a love song, or a noblewoman might recite her own poetry while making aggressive eye contact with her ex. You can't look away. No one can. It's awkward. It's painful. It's culturally significant. Now, while you're watching this all unfold, spare a thought for the performers themselves. These weren't musicians in the modern sense with groupies, merch, and Spotify deals. These were enslaved artists, hired entertainers, or poor hopefuls trying to impress someone rich enough to offer patronage. Their lives depended on applause, on not missing a beat, on smiling even when someone threw a roasted fig at them for playing too enthusiastically during the fish course. And they didn't get breaks. The music lasted as long as the meal did, which, in elite Roman society, could stretch on for hours. From oysters to boar, to something that might be eel, the dinner marched on like an overfed centurion, and the band played on, quietly resenting their life choices. Eventually, when the food stopped coming and the guests started reclining more sideways than upright, the music would soften. Someone might strum a lullaby. Someone else might play a tune so slow it became the musical equivalent of a sleep potion. And the room would drift into that hazy late-party stillness, where even the host starts blinking slower, and everyone regrets their fourth helping of honey-glazed dormice. The performers, still alert, still listening for a final command, would gently ease into silence. Maybe if the gods were kind, they'd be allowed to eat the leftovers in the kitchen. Maybe they'd just collapse somewhere behind the wine jars, humming quietly to themselves. And you? You survived the show. You heard every warbled note, every improvised lyric, every overlong lyre solo. You've clapped, you've nodded, and you've witnessed one man weep openly during a song about cabbage. Welcome to the high-end entertainment scene of ancient Rome, where every party had a soundtrack, and every soundtrack had stakes. And tomorrow, if your ears are still ringing, that means they did a good job. Or someone dropped a cymbal near your face again. Either way, it's all part of the experience. Trying to flirt in ancient Rome is like watching someone romance a statue with a wine buzz. Lines include things like, "You shine brighter than the forum torches," which somehow works, especially if you own a villa. Welcome to the most awkward corner of Roman nightlife, the ancient flirting arena. Here, under the flicker of torchlight and the distant sounds of someone throwing up in a fountain, love, or at least strong mutual infatuation, tries its best to bloom. You're standing in a bustling plaza. The wine is flowing, the musicians are weeping into their flutes, and you spot a possible romantic interest across the crowd. Their tunic is pressed, their sandals are laced just right, and they haven't tripped over a cobblestone yet. That's a solid 9 inches Roman terms. Now comes the hard part. Opening lines. Roman flirting, much like Roman engineering, is technically impressive but emotionally confusing. Courting wasn't just about looks, it was about wordplay, wit, and the sheer audacity to compare someone's beauty to the moon while burping up garum sauce. You approach with a confident swagger, toga slightly off kilter, and mutter your best line. Your beauty rivals the grain yield of Egypt. Not exactly smooth, but in ancient Rome, agricultural metaphors were considered peak romance. You're essentially saying, you're hot and economically beneficial. A win-win. Flirting was especially common in forums, bathhouses, dinner parties, and anywhere people pretended they weren't just there to get noticed. A good Roman suitor might quote poetry, usually stolen from someone else, and deliver it with the emotional range of a wet sponge. If that failed, they'd compliment body parts in bizarrely specific ways. Your elbows curve like the hills of Etruria was somehow not an insult, but beware. If you were too forward, you risked scandal. If you were too subtle, you risked being mistaken for someone looking to borrow lentils. The balance was delicate. One wrong move, and suddenly you're explaining to a very large husband that you were just admiring his wife's ankle bone structure. For Roman women, especially those from respectable households, flirting was even trickier. Technically, good Roman matrons were supposed to be modest, reserved, and about as expressive as a statue of Juno. But in reality, flirting happened. It just had to be subtle. A lowered gaze, a strategically dropped handkerchief, a brief, lingering glance that said, "I find your military conquests mildly interesting. Slaves and freed people?" They had their own rules, mostly because they weren't bogged down by the heavy expectations of elite society. Flirting was more direct, more practical, and less likely to involve references to Cicero. They didn't have villas, but they had charm, and sometimes that was enough. Then there were the poets. Oh, the poets. Roman poets were the original thirsty Instagram influencers. Men like Ovid, Catullus, and Propertius wrote hundreds of verses dedicated to women and men they adored, obsessed over, or got dumped by after a particularly disastrous Saturnalia. Their love poems were dramatic, beautiful, and deeply unhealthy. I burn for you like Vesuvius, one might say, which is lovely until you remember Vesuvius buried an entire city. Still, these poems became part of the dating playbook. People would memorize them, quote them, and pretend to have written them. You could woo someone just by plagiarizing Ovid well enough to make them blush. Bonus points if you didn't mispronounce half the Latin. But not all romances were poetic. In fact, much of Roman love was transactional. Marriages were arranged, affairs were whispered about, and courtship often involved less candlelit charm and more awkward bartering, dramatic declarations, and bribing a maidservant to accidentally deliver a note sealed with your own bathwater-scented wax stamp. Of course, love had its risks. Jealous spouses, angry fathers, and nosy neighbors were always watching. Privacy was rare, especially if you were from a prominent family. Every flirtatious moment came with the risk of social ruin, or worse, being loudly mocked in public graffiti. Imagine your most embarrassing date being carved into a wall in Pompeii for eternity. Claudia kisses like a wet sponge, Marcus was here. And yet, despite the pressure, the politics, and the poorly worded compliments, people still tried. They wrote awkward poems. They gave terrible gifts, a particularly bad one, a live eel, romantic and dangerous. They carved hearts into trees and paid musicians to play serenades outside balconies. Occasionally it even worked. You might even find yourself drawn into a flirtation of your own. Perhaps someone compliments your posture. Perhaps they offer you a fig. Perhaps they challenge you to a game of dice and wink when they lose. The vibe is clumsy, chaotic, and entirely human. Eventually, the night wears on. The flirtations fade into drunken toasts. The torchlight flickers low. Someone across the forum is singing a love song to their ex while balancing on a barrel. No one stops them. You walk away, heart slightly warmer, ego slightly bruised, and stomach slightly full of pickled olives. You didn't fall in love tonight, but you did get called the sparkle in Jupiter's eye by someone who smelled like onions and ambition. And honestly, that's a win in ancient Rome. You stumble into an alley and see ancient messages scrawled in charcoal on the walls. Marcus was here. Julia is hot. Beware of the dog. It's basically the Roman version of Twitter, just with worse spelling and more plumbing references. Rome might have built aqueducts and roads, but it also built walls, and those walls were not safe. Because the moment a surface stood still long enough to dry, someone grabbed a piece of charcoal or a pointy object and decided to express their deepest feelings, poetic thoughts, or aggressive bathroom commentary. No building, bathhouse, or temple wall was safe from the onslaught of unsolicited opinions and weirdly specific threats. You lean in, trying to make out the faded Latin. One message reads, "Lucius loves Antonia more than wine." Next to it, "Antonia loves Sabina. Sorry, Lucius." Then underneath that, in a different hand, "Sabina smells like fish." It's ancient drama layered like lasagna, preserved in stone for eternity. Shakespeare could never. Roman graffiti wasn't always romantic. It could be rude, obscene, philosophical, political, desperate, or just plain bored. One of the most common phrases found across Pompeii, "I was here." That's it. Thousands of years, entire empires, and someone still felt the need to write the ancient equivalent of first comment on the wall of a bakery. Sometimes you'd get poetry. Sometimes insults. Sometimes a guy trying to advertise his services as a gladiator, baker, or part-time god. But the tone? Always passionate. Roman graffiti wasn't subtle. It was loud, proud, and deeply personal, even when it made no sense at all. For instance, someone once wrote, "Kilo, a eunuch, taught me to play the lyre badly." That's not even an insult. That's just an unfortunate Yelp review of a music teacher with a tragic backstory. But Chilo's name lives on, scraped into plaster with all the permanence of a tattoo you regret 5 minutes after getting it. You move down the alley and find a slightly more enthusiastic declaration. Celadus, the Thracian, makes the girls sigh. It's unclear if Celadus wrote this himself or had a fan club. Either way, he's out here living his best life and possibly nursing a pulled muscle from all the sighs. Roman graffiti was also shockingly raunchy. There's no way to sugarcoat it. The average wall in Pompeii reads like a teenage boy's notebook during a particularly boring math class. Drawings of genitalia, creative name-calling, and bedroom bragging rights are everywhere. One wall literally says, "Restituta took pleasure on the bench." Another, near a bakery, "Weep, you girls. My lover left me and took my sandals." Is this tragic? Petty? Profound? It's hard to say. But it's real. In a world without social media, emojis, or late-night texting, this was how Romans communicated their feels. You wanted to declare your love? Find a wall. You wanted to roast someone for being bad at dice? Wall. You wanted to announce a party, share a recipe, warn about a dog, or confess to losing your laundry? All of it wall. And speaking of dogs, cave canem, beware of the dog, was a popular phrase, often paired with adorable or deeply terrifying mosaic dogs at front doors. Some houses had actual illustrated warnings, complete with snarling hounds and dramatic font. It was the original "Beware of Dogs" sign, except in Latin and occasionally misspelled. But graffiti wasn't just for jokes and insults. It could also be deeply human. Some of it was heartbreakingly sweet. "Oh, wall, I am surprised you have not fallen down under the weight of so many stupid things written on you." That's a real quote. From a real Roman, who clearly had had enough of the ancient Twitter feed. There were political messages too. Candidates paid people to scribble their campaign slogans across cities, turning back alleys into election battlegrounds. You'd see messages like, "Vote for Lucius Papidius, he's a good man," immediately followed by, "Don't vote for Lucius Papidius. He bathes once a week. Democracy in action." And let's not forget the passive-aggressive messages. The ancient Romans were masters of the subtweet. You'd find things like, "Secundus is a thief. Don't trust Marcus. He lies. To the person who stole my tunic. May your feet always itch." Savage. Honest. Immortalized. Some walls even had running arguments, graffiti battles where one person wrote something, another responded, and so on, until you had a full conversation etched into stucco like a Reddit thread gone nuclear. Sometimes the writing switched languages, Latin, Greek, even Oscan, just to make sure everyone got the message and the insult. You step further into the alley, and it hits you. This was how people stayed connected. These weren't just scribbles, they were memories. Petty, personal, hilarious time capsules. Ancient Romans didn't just want to live, they wanted to be heard. To vent, to joke, to confess something weird and hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would see it and laugh. So when you look at these walls, you're not just looking at old stone. You're reading someone's diary, their bad date recap, their love confession, their hot take on their neighbor's cooking. And honestly, it makes them feel closer than half the people in your group chat. You brush your fingers over a faded line. "I screwed the barmaid." Classic. Right next to it, "So did I." Timeless. Human. Slightly gross. This wasn't the history of emperors or battles. This was the history of everyone else, messy, drunk, romantic, and entirely unfiltered. You walk away from the wall, the sound of distant music echoing behind you, and you smile. Because 2,000 years later, we're still writing dumb stuff to feel a little less alone. And the Romans? They got there first. A Roman midnight snack might be snails, figs soaked in honey, and some deeply suspicious fish sauce. If it jiggles and smells like the harbor, it's probably dinner. You eat it anyway. You're 2 cups in, and standards are low. It's late. The lamps are flickering, the flute players have gone hoarse, and someone just fell into a fountain after declaring their undying love to a statue of Hercules. In other words, it's the perfect time for a snack. But forget about pizza. There's no gooey cheese, no tomato sauce, and absolutely no delivery service unless you count a boy named Tullus who might show up with something wrapped in fig leaves if he doesn't get distracted by a dice game. Roman late-night eating is a journey. You stumble into a popina, one of those rough-around-the-edges taverns that somehow smells like both wine and wet goat. The menu? Limited. The hygiene? Ambiguous. The cook? Angry. But the food? Technically edible. First up, snails. Not the fancy French kind. These are Roman street snails, likely raised in a bucket behind someone's laundry, and fed nothing but milk and regret to fatten them up. They're boiled, seasoned with garum, We'll get to that horror shortly. And served on a plate that might have been washed this week. Maybe. Then there are figs soaked in honey. A genuinely pleasant surprise. Sweet, sticky, and vaguely nutritious. These are the Roman equivalent of cookies if your cookies came with the risk of ant infestation and a small chance of being stolen by a passing cat. Nuts are also on the menu: almonds, walnuts, pine nuts, roasted, salted, and guaranteed to get stuck in your teeth for the rest of the evening. They're served in clay bowls, usually with no explanation or utensils. You just dig in with your fingers and hope your seatmate isn't judging you while simultaneously doing the same thing. But the real headliner? Garum. Sweet Poseidon, the garum. Imagine fish left to rot in the sun, mashed into a sludge, then lovingly strained and bottled like perfume. If perfume could curdle. Garum is a fermented fish sauce that Romans put on everything. Meat, garum, bread, garum, fruit, garum, somehow. It's tangy, salty, and smells like Neptune's laundry basket. No one knows why garum was so beloved. Was it the umami hit? The thrill of bacterial roulette? The fact that it doubled as a household cleaner? Whatever the reason, it's here. It's on your food. It's probably on your tunic. Just embrace it. Another late-night classic, pulse. That's a barley porridge that's been boiled to a consistency somewhere between oatmeal and roofing paste. It comes plain or mixed with cheese, herbs, or leftover meat scraps. It tastes like survival, which is really the theme of Roman cuisine. If you're lucky, the tavern might be serving lupini beans brined and bitter, requiring some very aggressive chewing. These are the ancient world's answer to bar peanuts. Cheap, salty, and just filling enough to keep you from rioting. Then there's bread, or what passes for it. Roman bread at night is usually yesterday's leftovers, dense, chewy, and vaguely brick-like. You'll need strong teeth or at least a decent throwing arm if you decide to give up and yeet it at a wall out of frustration. It was also used as a utensil, napkin, or when desperation hit a pillow. And let's not forget cheese, which ranged from crumbly goat varieties to soft sheep cheeses that may or may not have been aged in a questionable amphora behind the tavern. There's no refrigeration. There's only hope. Every so often, someone splurges and orders dormice. Yes, dormice. These plump little rodents were considered a delicacy, stuffed with nuts, honey, and herbs, then roasted and served on little platters like tiny meatloaves with feet. They're not awful. They're just alarming. You see someone nearby tearing into one with surprising enthusiasm. You make eye contact. They nod solemnly, as if to say, "Don't knock it till you've gnawed the tail." Dessert, if you can call it that, includes dates, sometimes filled with nuts, sometimes dipped in wine, sometimes just dropped on the floor and picked back up with a shrug. There's also the occasional sweet cake made with honey and spelt flour, but don't expect frosting. This is the ancient world. Frosting hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had, it would probably be made of goat lard and sadness. As you chew your way through a lukewarm barley cake with the texture of ancient pottery, you realize the line between food and punishment is thin. But you're 2 cups in, your standards are relaxing, and honestly, the snail isn't that bad if you don't think about it too much. Some meals are eaten standing, others perched awkwardly on wobbly stools, and occasionally on the floor if there's no space left, or you've simply accepted your fate as a human wine stain. And the drink of choice? More wine, obviously, possibly mixed with herbs, possibly cut with seawater, possibly containing a surprise object like a grape stem or a very confused beetle. But it does the job. You're warm, you're foolish, and your expectations have sunk lower than a Roman fishing boat in a storm. Midnight eating in Rome isn't glamorous. It's practical. It's impulsive. It's survival in edible form. So you slurp the last of your barley gruel, wipe your hands on a tunic you're pretending isn't yours, and lean back against the tavern wall. Around you, the night hums with laughter, slurred Latin, and the occasional squawk from a nearby goose someone's trying to flirt with, don't ask. And as your stomach settles into the uneasy peace of partial satisfaction and mild confusion, you think, it's not pizza, but it'll do. If you're rich, your evening involves a convivium, a feast with couches, courses that never end, and guests who don't know when to stop quoting Virgil. You lie on your side for hours, pretending this is fun while slowly turning into a decorative pillow. Welcome to the Roman upper class's idea of a good time. A banquet so long, so absurdly over the top, it feels less like dinner and more like a personality test designed by Jupiter himself. The convivium is the social event of the evening, a place where reputations are made, alliances are forged, ducks are stuffed with other ducks, and everybody pretends that lying on a couch while eating snails is the peak of civilization. Let's set the scene. You've arrived fashionably late, because being punctual is for peasants and accountants. You're greeted by a doorman who looks at your sandals with judgment, then lets you in because your family once donated a statue to the temple. Inside, the air smells of perfume, wine, roast meat, and barely concealed political tension. The room is filled with couches arranged in a U shape, because in Rome, chairs are apparently for people who don't own slaves. You don't sit, you recline. On your left side, to be precise. This position helps you digest more slowly and also gives your host a better angle to admire your profile while you chew goose liver. It's deeply uncomfortable, but tradition says if you lie down for long enough, you'll eventually stop feeling your spine. And now, the food. Roman banquets are not single-course affairs. They are multi-hour marathons of gluttony, interrupted only by poetry readings, drunken philosophy, and the occasional interpretive dance. The first course is the gustatio, basically ancient appetizers. Expect eggs, olives, little pastries stuffed with questionable meat, and sauces so strong they could peel paint off a fresco. Garum, naturally, is involved. Always. You nibble, sip, and listen to a man named Decimus explain how his grandfather once debated Cicero and lost with honor. Across the room, someone recites a poem about bees. You pretend to be impressed while slowly choking on a pickled fig. Then comes the prima mensa, the main course, also known as how much animal can we stuff into another animal before the gods smite us? The Romans love meat. They roast it, boil it, bake it, or just wrap it in pastry and call it fancy. A typical main course might include stuffed dormice, glazed in honey and sprinkled with poppy seeds like some sort of rodent donut, sausages made of everything except the parts you want, boiled ostrich, because why not eat a bird that can look you in the eye as you chew its leg, flamingo tongues which are real, disturbingly expensive, and considered a delicacy, and yes, ducks, often several, layered within each other like a feathery Russian nesting doll, then baked until your arteries begin to whisper, please, no more. Each dish is announced with flair by a parade of servants, some of whom are balancing trays bigger than their torsos, while others simply try not to drop the eel aspic. The host beams with pride. The guests clap. A man near you has clearly never seen a peacock roasted and served with its own feathers reattached for decoration. He cries a little. And then there's the wine. Oh, the wine. It flows like the Tiber after a thunderstorm, endless, occasionally murky, and often regretted. It's served in goblets the size of small helmets and mixed to taste, which usually means just enough water to pretend you're not getting hammered. Toasts are frequent and increasingly bizarre. One man raises a cup to the empire, another to the gods, a third to my cousin's new sandals. Everyone cheers. Eventually, things get weirder. The secunda mensa, or dessert course, arrives. It features fruits, nuts, and sweets that would horrify modern dentists. Figs soaked in honey, dates stuffed with almonds, and cakes made of cheese and wine. Everything is sticky. Everything is rich. Everything is served with a flourish and at least one food pun. A man makes a joke about his wife being sweeter than boiled grapes. She does not laugh. By now, you've been reclining for 3 hours. Your left arm is asleep. Your back is begging for mercy. You're full tipsy, and starting to question if that last sausage winked at you. The entertainment escalates. There's music, poetry. Possibly a reenactment of the Trojan War using only bread rolls and dramatic hand gestures. Someone juggles. Someone else sings a ballad about their lost goat. At least one man challenges another to a philosophical duel about whether love is real or just indigestion from the oysters. You try to sneak out. You cannot. The host has locked the door. Not metaphorically, literally. No one leaves until he says so, or until the vomiting begins, whichever comes first. Ah yes, the vomiting. Romans had a complicated relationship with food and restraint, which is to say, they had neither. Some banquets even included designated vomiting rooms where guests could discreetly make space for more courses. No one talks about it openly. Everyone knows. You pretend not to hear the retching from behind the curtain and continue nibbling your date-filled pastry like nothing is wrong. Finally, at what might be midnight or possibly dawn, the host makes one last toast. Everyone applauds. The musicians wheeze their final notes. You rise slowly, creakingly, like a statue that's been lying on its side for centuries. You made it. You survived the Roman banquet. And as you stumble home, toga wrinkled, mouth sticky with honey, you realize dinner in ancient Rome isn't about food. It's about excess, about status, about proving you can lie on your side for 6 hours without crying. And also, apparently, about ducks. So many ducks. Despite the name, vomitoriums weren't rooms for vomiting. Sorry. They were exit corridors in amphitheaters. But yes, some Romans did make space for more food by voluntarily returning previous courses. Classy. Let's clear this up once and for all. The legendary Roman vomitorium was not, repeat not, a special room where dinner guests politely excused themselves to yak up their duck liver so they could fit in more goose spleen. It's a linguistic trap, a historical misunderstanding, and frankly a shame, because if you've ever eaten 15 honey-soaked figs while lying on your side, you'll understand why the myth has such powerful staying power. In truth, a vomitorium was simply the grand corridor in amphitheaters or stadiums that vomited crowds out into the street. That's it. Just an exit. You've probably walked through one after a football game or a particularly disappointing concert. No buckets, no discreet retching, just a crowd flowing like a river of tunics and spilled popcorn. But the ancient Romans? Oh, they did vomit, just not in a special designated lounge with marble basins and harp music. Let's paint the scene. You're several hours deep into a banquet. You've reclined your way through quail eggs, stuffed dormice, mystery sauces, and a dessert shaped like a small temple. Your host is still rolling out courses like he's trying to offend the gods with excess. You're full. Everyone is full. The lyre player is crying. And then someone discreetly disappears behind a curtain. This is where things get real. Vomiting, while not something openly celebrated, wasn't exactly taboo either, especially in elite circles where overeating was practically an Olympic event. To willingly empty yourself mid-feast wasn't seen as gross, it was just strategic. Like medieval carb loading, but in reverse. You weren't supposed to talk about it. No one clapped when you returned. There was no ceremonial gong. But if you wanted to impress your peers with your stamina, your appetite, and your complete disregard for digestive consequences, you excused yourself, made room, and came back for seconds like nothing happened. Bonus points if you kept your toga clean. This practice wasn't universal. Plenty of Romans thought it was disgusting, indulgent, or just bad manners. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher and all-around killjoy, once wrote about guests who would vomit so they could fill themselves again. He was horrified. His friends probably stopped inviting him to dinner. Still, this behavior stuck in the imagination because, let's be honest, it feels Roman. Extravagant. Excessive. A civilization that built aqueducts and colosseums and tax systems, and still thought puking for pleasure was a valid lifestyle choice. And this is where the myth of the vomitorium takes root. Somewhere along the line, people got confused. Probably because Latin is a mischievous language, and because vomiting was associated with Roman feasting, even if it wasn't structurally supported by actual architecture. So someone saw the word vomitorium, learned it was Roman and thought, aha, they had rooms for this. And the rest, as they say, is bad history. Even now, you'll find people smart, otherwise educated people, who will confidently tell you that Romans had purpose-built spew chambers at their dinner parties. They imagined padded alcoves with gentle lighting and complimentary mints. In reality, probably a dark corner behind the courtyard where nobody was watching, and a discreet slave handing you a damp cloth afterward. It's worth noting that vomit wasn't even the most dramatic thing to happen at Roman banquets. People collapsed, fainted, occasionally died. One man reportedly choked to death on a single hair in his milk. Another allegedly laughed himself to death at a joke about a donkey. The food was wild, the company was wilder, and the line between indulgence and disaster was as thin as a pickled fish bone. And speaking of food, imagine why someone might resort to such extremes. This wasn't just a heavy meal. This was a marathon of meat, wine, song, and peer pressure. Every course was a test of endurance. Every new dish a dare. If someone across the couch kept eating, so did you, because stopping would suggest weakness. Or, worse, that you couldn't afford to keep up. And so, when your stomach started staging a coup, your options were limited. Suffer in silence, or duck behind the curtain, upend your insides, and return with a renewed appetite and a smile that said, "I am more goose than man now." It's hard to say how widespread this practice really was. Most of what we know comes from satirical poems, moralistic essays, and second-hand reports from dinner guests who may or may not have been exaggerating for effect. But even if it was rare, the idea of it stuck. Because it says something about Roman culture, their obsession with abundance, status, and theatricality. To vomit wasn't just about food. It was about performance. So no, there was no vomitorium. But yes, somewhere in a shadowy corner of a marble villa, a nobleman named Titus was probably hurling into a potted plant so he could try the third round of roasted peacock. And when he came back, no one asked questions. He just raised his goblet, smiled faintly and said, "I hear dessert is fermented shark spleen tonight." And everyone clapped. Quietly. Because in ancient Rome, gluttony was an art form, and sometimes art required a little purge between courses. You're not rich. You live in an insula, a 5-story Roman apartment complex with thin walls and a smell of cabbage that's somehow louder than your upstairs neighbor's clogs. Night here means noise, heat, and the occasional ceiling collapse. Welcome to your humble Roman digs, the insula. Not to be confused with a charming island retreat, this is more like a giant brick shoebox stacked on top of other shoeboxes. Think urban housing project, but with less plumbing, more rats, and a real chance that your ceiling could fall on you during dinner, or sleep, or frankly, at any time. Your unit is on the 3rd floor, which means you're neither rich enough to live on the ground floor where rent is highest and toilets are a possibility, nor poor enough to live on the top floor where climbing the stairs is a cardio workout and your roof is the sky. No elevators here. Just steep, narrow staircases that feel like a cruel architectural joke, especially when you're carrying a jug of water, a basket of figs, and a deep existential dread. Let's talk about the smell. It's not one thing, it's everything. Boiled vegetables, wet wool, goat, garlic, something you hope is fish, and a suspiciously persistent note of moldy limestone. The walls are made of cheap concrete and brick, which is to say, they have the insulation qualities of a damp sheet. You can hear everything. Babies crying, arguments over lentils, someone 2 doors down practicing their poetry with the emotional range of a turnip. The floors creak, the ceilings flake, the pipes, if they exist, drip, and your upstairs neighbor, a retired soldier named Publius, who insists on wearing wooden-soled sandals indoors, sounds like he's rehearsing a one-man reenactment of the Battle of Actium every time he moves a chair. Still, it's home. At night, the insula doesn't quiet down, it shifts gears. The market noise fades, but the domestic symphony begins. Children being bathed in shallow basins. Someone lighting an oil lamp with a flick and a prayer. Old women muttering spells against toothaches. The faint tinkling of a neighbor trying to tune a lyre and failing. And outside, the endless shuffle of sandals, merchants packing up, and distant drunks quoting Cicero with the confidence of someone who's never actually read Cicero. If you need light, you've got a flickering oil lamp that smokes like it's holding a grudge. If you need air, you've got a tiny window that opens directly into the aroma of someone else's dinner disaster. If you need water, well, better get in line at the public fountain downstairs and hope you don't drop your amphora. Again, the walls, bless them, try their best. But they're so thin that when your neighbor sneezes, you say, "Bless you," through the wall, and they thank you back. Privacy is theoretical. Secrets are community property. And the sound of someone snoring 3 apartments over becomes the soundtrack of your dreams, whether you like it or not. Now let's talk safety. or the thrilling lack thereof. Insulae had a well-earned reputation for being fire traps. Many were built hastily, with shoddy materials and ambitious landlords who believed bricks were optional above the second floor. Open flames, oil lamps, and cooking fires made for a delightful nightly gamble. Will tonight be the night the stairs catch fire? Odds are decent. And speaking of cooking, you do yours in a corner, on a small clay stove, using kindling that's probably stolen from a public bathhouse. You try not to cook anything that spits oil or requires serious heat, because that might start a blaze, and more importantly, you'll never hear the end of it from the woman downstairs who already thinks your boiled lentils smell sinful. If you have a toilet, it's a pot under the bed. If you don't, it's a walk down the stairs to the alley out back, which doubles as a latrine, chicken coop, and meeting spot for every cat in the neighborhood. You try not to look down or breathe. So why do people live in these places? Simple. They're cheap, they're central, and they beat sleeping in a cart. Rome's population is bursting at the seams, and not everyone can afford a villa with mosaic floors and private atriums. The insula is the compromise. You get a roof, walls, sort of, and a sense of community forged through shared hardship, shared walls, and shared complaints about Publius and his clogs. And despite the noise, the leaks, and the occasional rodent roommate, there's life here. Real life. You know your neighbors, you know their business. You've borrowed their vinegar and listened to their marital disputes and watched their kids grow up and then move to the floor above to repeat the cycle. At night, as you lie on your straw-stuffed mattress listening to the city murmur through the cracks in the wall, you feel it that strange Roman comfort. You're tired, you're sweaty, you're pretty sure something just moved near your foot, but you belong. You're part of the great organism that is Rome. And though you'll never dine with senators or ride in a litter carried by 4 sweaty men, you do get to fall asleep to the familiar creak of wood, the soft hiss of oil lamps, and Publius arguing with his wife about whether the cheese went bad or if it always smelled like that. And tomorrow? You'll do it all again. Because the insula may be loud, leaky, and vaguely terrifying, but it's also home. And in ancient Rome, that's something to hold on to, even if you have to sleep with one eye open and a bucket next to your bed. While you stumble through the streets, Rome's vigiles, part firefighter, part police, all underpaid patrol with torches, yelling at drunkards and occasionally arresting goats. You avoid eye contact. You look like the kind of person they'd fine for breathing. It's deep in the Roman night, and while you're weaving down the cobbled alleyways in search of more wine, less dignity, or possibly your sandal, it's unclear. Someone else is very much on the clock. Enter the vigiles, the underappreciated, overworked, and perpetually annoyed guardians of Rome after dark. Picture them like this. A small group of men in slightly mismatched uniforms, carrying torches, slings, batons, and the heavy burden of being the only sober people in a city of 1 million, trying its best to party, fight, or accidentally set itself on fire. Their job? Everything. These guys were Rome's all-purpose night staff, part firefighter, part night cop, part disappointed uncle who's just trying to keep the peace. Think mall security meets volunteer fire brigade, meets a Roman centurion who peaked early and never quite recovered. You spot one now. He's got a torch in one hand, a grimace on his face, and he's actively shouting at a man who's urinating against a statue of Minerva. "That's divine property," he yells, before slipping slightly on a discarded olive. Dignity. Optional. Fire, however, is no joke. Rome's buildings, especially the insulae, were flammable masterpieces of cheap wood and wishful thinking. The vigiles were originally formed as firefighters, after Emperor Augustus realized that letting the entire city burn every 5 years was maybe not a long-term solution. They patrolled in squads, carrying buckets, hooks, ladders, and let's be honest, anxiety. They slept lightly, ate quickly, and could be woken by the smell of smoke or the sound of someone shouting. The stew exploded, and then there were the other fires. Metaphorical ones. Like crime, Rome at night could be wild. Fights broke out. Thieves prowled. Arguments over dice games turned into full-on sandals-off brawls. The vigiles had to break these up, often using the ancient Roman version of breaking it up, yelling very loudly and hoping nobody was armed. They'd detain drunks, arrest pickpockets, and chase down goats that had mysteriously wandered into temples. Yes, goats. It wasn't unusual to see a vigil escorting a bleating criminal back to its pen like a very confused livestock bouncer. Sometimes, if things got really dramatic, they'd haul you off to a holding cell, a simple chamber with more mildew than light, where you'd wait to be yelled at by a magistrate in the morning. Not ideal, especially if all you did was accidentally insult someone's toga. And here's the thing. The Vigiles were not exactly the Avengers. These weren't elite warriors. They were drawn from the lower classes, often freedmen, doing an essential job with minimal resources and maximum sass from every toga-wearing aristocrat who thought public urination was a constitutional right. Their shifts were long. The pay? Meh. The respect? Minimal. They were mocked, ignored, and occasionally pelted with figs by drunken philosophers who wanted to test gravity and social boundaries at the same time. But they mattered. If your house caught fire, you prayed for a squad of Vigiles to show up with buckets before everything turned into a crispy cautionary tale. If someone mugged your aunt near the forum, it was a vigil who'd track the thief, at least in theory. In practice, they might file a report, mutter something about a shortage of torches, and advise your aunt to avoid that street during Mercury retrograde. Still, their presence brought some sense of order to Rome's chaotic nightlife. Without them, the city would have been a 24/7 toga-wrapped thunderdome. Occasionally, they worked with lictors, the bodyguards of magistrates, or with urban cohorts, a slightly more serious force of muscle-bound enforcers who looked like they bench-pressed amphorae for fun. But at night, it was mostly the Vigiles and their torches versus the chaos of a population that had discovered both fermented honey and personal opinions. Sometimes they were stationed near fountains. Other times they wandered, alert for signs of smoke, screams, or someone throwing a party that had gotten way out of hand. And you didn't want to cross them. Not because they were powerful, but because they had energy. The kind of tired, fed-up energy only a man who's chased a goat through 3 alleys at 2 a.m. can possess. You pass one now. He eyes you. You nod. He grunts. That's the ancient Roman version of, don't start something you can't finish. And truly you can't. You're full of duck, half drunk on diluted wine, and wearing one sandal. It's not your night to fight a vigil. As you shuffle off, he lights another torch, mutters something about bloody poets and their lyres, and continues his patrol. Because the night is long, the city is flammable, and someone just tripped over a fish cart in the Subura again, and somewhere, another vigil sighs, adjusts his belt, and says to no one in particular, should have been a baker, but he won't quit. He can't. Because without the Vigiles, Rome wouldn't survive the night. It would burn, brawl, and break apart by sunrise. And so, they march on. Grumpy, heroic, slightly sweaty, Rome's grumpiest insomniacs, keeping the night just barely under control. Late-night bath visits are a thing. You scrub down next to a merchant with strong opinions on grain prices. Someone's playing dice in the corner. Someone else is singing. This is less hygiene and more chaotic spa energy. You've decided to end your Roman night with a visit to the Thermae, the glorious, echoey bathhouses that smell faintly of wet sandals, old bronze, and eucalyptus if you're lucky, or boiled cabbage if you're not. It's dark outside. The taverns are winding down. The streets are quiet, except for a goat who refuses to go home. But the bathhouse? Still buzzing. Public baths in Rome aren't just about getting clean. Oh no. They are everything. Gym, lounge, networking hub, local gossip den, and one very slippery social minefield. Think Roman Starbucks. If Starbucks included communal foot scrubbing and heated floors, you hand your clothes off to a kid at the front, a low-ranking slave whose job is to guard your belongings with the intensity of a Roman god. Except he's 11 and distracted by dice. You mutter a prayer to Mercury and step into the steam. The temperature hits you immediately warm, heavy, humid like walking into a towel someone's been yelling into for 10 minutes. Your pores open, your hair frizzes. Your sandals make that awkward suction sound that ensures everyone knows you're new here. First stop, the apoditerium, or changing room. It's loud, crowded, and vaguely chaotic. Tunics are flying. Someone's arguing about a missing sandal. An old man is doing stretches that should be illegal in public. You pretend not to notice and move quickly toward the main attraction, the baths. Now you've got options. Want to ease in gently? Head to the tepidarium, the warm room. It's soothing, dimly lit, and smells like cedar and ambition. Merchants murmur about trade routes. Philosophers quietly judge everyone. A man next to you is writing poetry on a wax tablet while aggressively exfoliating his knees. Need a real sweat? Enter the caldarium, the hot bath. It's steamy, it's intense, it's loud. Your skin instantly reconsiders its life choices. The heat fogs your vision. Somewhere in the mist, a group of men are debating the finer points of fish sauce taxation. Another guy is singing loudly and off-key. You sit down on a marble bench and immediately understand why people faint in here. It's like bathing in soup. You are the soup, but it's not just the water. It's the energy. People aren't silent here. They're socializing. Loudly. It's the kind of place where a casual dip turns into a heated discussion about gladiator rankings, grain shortages, or who saw the Vestal Virgin sneeze in public. Scandalous. Someone asks your opinion on land reform. You say, "I just came to rinse my armpits." They nod sagely. Exactly. Then comes the strigil. There is no soap. There is no loofah. There is only the strigil, a curved metal tool used to scrape oil, dirt, and shame from your body. A slave helps you apply olive oil, then drags the strigil across your skin like he's sanding furniture. You feel strangely renewed, also mildly attacked. And yes, oil. Romans clean themselves with oil. The logic goes, rub on oil, scrape it off with dirt, and you're clean, sort of. The end result is that you're gleaming like a well-polished statue and smell faintly like salad dressing. You move on to the frigidarium, the cold plunge pool. This is not for the faint of heart. It is freezing. Someone screams. Someone else laughs. You jump in, and your soul momentarily leaves your body to file a complaint. But afterward, your skin tingles, your thoughts clear, and for a brief moment, you understand the appeal of Roman engineering. All around you, life continues. A couple of soldiers compare scars. A baker complains about yeast. Two teens try to impress each other by flexing badly. A philosopher holds court in the corner, telling a story that involves a camel, a senator, and what might be a metaphor for love or indigestion. And then there's the dice game. Every bathhouse has one. Somewhere near the pillars, a small crowd gathers around men tossing tesserae Roman dice onto the floor. Coins clink. Bets are shouted. A man in a damp toga swears loudly as he loses what might have been rent money. The crowd roars. The bath echoes with joy, frustration, and someone whispering, "I knew he'd roll a 2. Eventually, you leave the baths, cleaner than you've been in days, but also strangely more tired. Your muscles are soft. Your brain is full. Your ears are ringing from the man who insisted on singing a love ballad to his own reflection. You dry off badly using a cloth that could be confused for a napkin. Your tunic feels slightly damp. Your sandals are nowhere to be found. The kid swears someone matching your description took them. You suspect it was the goat. Still, you walk home barefoot, skin glowing, hair wild, smelling like olive oil and public optimism, because for all its weirdness, chaos, and strangely intimate conversations with naked strangers, the Roman bathhouse is one thing above all else. Alive. And as the city quiets, and the night grows heavy, you think maybe we're not so different now. We still gather, we still gossip, we still sweat in shared spaces and leave feeling kind of reborn, even if we lose a sandal in the process. On certain streets, red lanterns glow faintly. Behind them, lupanars, brothels decorated with suggestive wall art and mystery smells. Prices are posted, options are varied, and the line between affection and capitalism is blurry. You've had a long Roman evening, wine, snails, a bath that turned into a political debate, and now, as the city settles into a hazy hum of distant laughter and sandal scuffles, you turn a corner and find yourself in a part of town where the lanterns burn a little lower, and the murals get a little more instructional. Welcome to the lupanar, the Roman brothel, named for lupa, Latin for she-wolf, which is either a poetic nod or a deeply awkward metaphor, These establishments are more common than you'd expect and less discreet than you'd hope. The red-tinted oil lamps hanging above doorways aren't for ambiance, they're advertising. Subtlety is not on the menu. The building is usually stone simple, squat, and very public. Unlike modern ideas of secrecy and privacy, Roman brothels were often on bustling streets, just a toga tug away from the local bakery. You could, in theory, grab a loaf of bread and dessert, all before your wine buzz wore off. Inside, it's a sensory experience. The first thing you notice is the smell, a thick mix of oil lamps, sweat, perfume, wine, and something unidentifiably damp. Then there's the sound, soft music, whispered negotiations, the creak of ancient beds, and someone in the back quoting erotic poetry like it's their job. It is. The decor? Let's just say functional yet graphic. The walls are plastered literally with vivid frescoes depicting all manner of creative activities, each painted with the same artistic enthusiasm you might use for a bowl of fruit. It's less about seduction and more about a visual menu. Can't read? No problem. Just point at the wall. Each room is tiny, often no bigger than a closet with a stone bed built into the floor and maybe, a thin cushion. Don't expect candles, wine service, or smooth jazz. This isn't the Roman Ritz. It's more transactional, more crowded, and significantly louder. And yes, prices are posted, sometimes graffitied right on the wall, next to helpful user reviews. Flavia was fast. Gaius never pays. Beware of Lucius, he bites. It's Yelp, but in Latin and written in charcoal. The workers, both men and women, are often slaves or freed people. Their lives are hard, their hours long, and their job stability entirely dependent on the whims of their owners or madams. It's grim, complicated, and often heartbreaking. But within this world, there's also community, hierarchy, and a kind of resilience you don't see unless you look past the frescoes. Some specialize in particular clientele: sailors, merchants, bored senators. Others operate out of taverns, back rooms, or even above bathhouses, offering full-service spa packages, if you will. The options, like the smells, are varied. And let's not pretend the clientele are subtle. Drunken noblemen in embroidered tunics, soldiers freshly paid and loudly confident, married men muttering excuses about philosophy club. Even the occasional poet, desperate for inspiration and pretending this is research. You're just observing, you say. But the woman leaning against the wall sees right through that. She smirks. She's seen hundreds like you, tipsy, curious, nervous, and holding your toga in a way that screams, "I've made questionable choices tonight, and I'm open to more." Oh, the lupanar runs on a peculiar mix of pleasure and power. It's where wealth meets vulnerability, where status can be role-played or discarded entirely, where someone can be both objectified and yet hold a strange sort of control, at least in the moment. And it's not all transactional. Some regulars return again and again for the same person. Emotions bloom awkwardly, coins turn into gifts, goodbyes get longer. Is it affection? Habit? Stockholm Syndrome with extra body oil? Hard to say. The line between profession and intimacy has always been blurry in the flickering light of late-night Rome. Meanwhile, outside, life continues. You hear a lyre in the distance. Someone shouts about losing their sandal. A cat knocks over an amphora with zero remorse. Back inside, another couple disappears behind a curtain. The door creaks. The lamp flickers. And a bored-looking man leans against the wall, sipping wine, clearly just here for the company, or waiting for his friend who went in 45 minutes ago. It's worth noting, Romans didn't carry the same puritanical shame around sex work that later cultures developed. Brothels were part of the urban ecosystem. Legal, taxed, and accepted with a shrug and a joke about stamina. What would scandalize later societies was, to many Romans, just Tuesday night. That said, not everyone approved. Philosophers and moralists, especially the Stoics, who were fun at parties, often railed against the moral decay of public pleasure, but they were usually ignored, drowned out by the clink of coin and the groan of worn-out stone mattresses. As you exit, the street feels both louder and quieter. The night stretches on. You hear footsteps, music, and the bark of a dog who's probably judging you. You glance back at the glowing lantern. Another figure enters, adjusting his belt. Just behind him, a voice calls out cheerfully, "We're full tonight, unless you're paying double." Rome doesn't sleep. It shifts. From bath to banquet, tavern to temple, dice game to lupanar, the night is just another stage, and everyone plays their part. And you? You walk on, sandals dusty, toga wrinkled, and brain full of frescoes you'll never unsee. It's late. It's loud. It's Rome. And everything has a price, even if it's just curiosity, paid in glances. Love in ancient Rome is transactional, dramatic, and occasionally poetic. If you write her a poem, she might swoon, or throw a jug at you. Either way, it's love, baby. Welcome to the romantic battlefield of ancient Rome, where Cupid's arrows are frequently dipped in sarcasm, and where dating feels less like finding a soulmate and more like negotiating a very fragile treaty while being pelted with olives. You're in love, or at least you've convinced yourself that the woman who complimented your sandals at the bathhouse is the one. What next? Roses? Chocolate? A well-crafted playlist? No. In Rome, you write poetry. Passionate, over the top, rhythmically unstable poetry in painfully flowery Latin. You compare her to Venus, a swan, or the moon. You mention her eyes at least 6 times. You make a tortured pun about her name and the stars. You deliver it to her doorstep like a Roman Uber eats of romantic desperation. And then you wait. She may swoon, or laugh, or publicly recite your poem at a party while replacing your name with Stincius Maximus. It's a gamble. But hey, nothing says true love like public humiliation in front of a dozen senators. Roman dating wasn't all moonlight and metaphors. It was also extremely strategic. Who you courted and how depended entirely on your class, your status, and whether your family was okay with you marrying someone whose uncle once insulted the emperor's beard. Marriage was often arranged. Love was optional. Families negotiated unions like they were acquiring land, goats, or vintage amphorae. She has 3 vineyards and speaks decent Greek. We'll take her. But even in this contractual landscape, passion still found a way awkwardly, sometimes illegally, and often with a lot of sneaking around. Secret trysts in alleyways, love notes scribbled on wax tablets, coded graffiti on public walls that read, "Livia, you make my toga tight." Subtle. And of course there were affairs. Rome was built on columns, bricks, and absolutely wild personal lives. Even the nobility couldn't keep their tunics buttoned. Emperor Augustus passed morality laws to encourage faithful marriages, which is ironic, considering his daughter Julia collected lovers like they were collectible coins. So, let's say you're trying to pursue a respectable lady. You'll need 1. Poetry. Already covered. Must include at least 1 line comparing her to something celestial. Bonus points if it rhymes. 2. Discretion. Her family is watching, the neighbors are watching, the doorman is definitely watching, and will absolutely tell her father if you wink too long. 3. Gifts. Jewelry, fine fabrics, perfume, or, if you're broke, a nicely shaped rock with her name on it. You do your best. And 4. Persistence. Romans loved drama. If you don't look mildly obsessed, is it even real love? But not everyone had access to respectable courtship. If you were poor, enslaved, or just really bad at metaphors, you had to get creative. You might try your luck in the marketplace, the tavern, or the bathhouse, where the rules were looser and the conversations flowed as freely as the watered-down wine. And then there were love spells. Yes, magic. Some Romans turned to sorcery to win hearts. You could hire a witch to perform a binding spell, or bury a cursed figurine under your crush's doorstep. Nothing says romance like clay dolls full of nails. May her heart burn for me until she cannot sleep or eat. Charming. Even if you managed to start something, Roman relationships were often messy. Jealousy ran high. Breakups happened in public. One lover might carve insults into a bathroom wall. Another might send a spiteful letter via a very confused messenger pigeon. And fidelity? Optional. It was widely accepted, if not openly encouraged, that married men might have lovers, especially enslaved ones. Wives were expected to look the other way, as long as the family name stayed clean. But if a woman stepped out, scandal, trial, potential exile, because hypocrisy was apparently Rome's favorite party game. Still, there were genuine connections. Couples who grew old together. Husbands who wrote tender epitaphs for their wives. Wives who managed estates, raised children, and tolerated dinner parties filled with poets and peacocks. Love may not have been the center of every union, but it made frequent surprise appearances. Some couples even eloped, against family wishes, with nothing but a stolen horse and bad decision-making skills, just like a romantic comedy, except someone probably got stabbed before Act 3. And then there were the flirtations that lived entirely in the imagination, longing glances across crowded forums, anonymous poems left at a doorstep, whispered compliments in the bath steam. Fleeting, awkward, intense, classic Roman crushes. So where does this leave you? Still single, possibly damp, but filled with a strange, ancient hope, because whether it's 20 BCE or 2025, love is confusing. It makes you write bad poems, spend too much on olives, and reconsider your hairstyle because she said curls are in. It's risky, it's dramatic, it's kind of embarrassing, but it's also timeless. And as you walk home beneath the torchlight, heart full, sandals scuffed, and toga slightly askew, you think maybe tomorrow she'll answer your poem. Or maybe she'll throw a jug at your head. Either way, it's love, baby. You find a dice game in progress. The rules? Unclear. The stakes? Everything. The players? Already yelling. In 5 minutes, someone flips a table. In 10, someone owes money to a man named Rufus with suspiciously clean hands. It's late. The stars are out. The streets smell like spilled wine, fried garum, and regret. You should go home. But instead, you're drawn toward a dimly lit alley echoing with curses, laughter, and the unmistakable clatter of dice skittering across a worn wooden board. Welcome to the Roman dice game, equal parts entertainment, addiction, and impending fistfight. You push through the circle of spectators and spot the action. 4 grown men hunched over a cracked table, faces tense, tunics wrinkled, and eyes flicking back and forth between coin piles and each other's hands like this is the final round of the World Series of ancient Rome. The game? Probably Alia or Tali. Both are Roman dice games, and both make modern Monopoly look like a relaxing stroll through a field of daffodils. Alia uses 6-sided dice, very familiar. But Tali? That's where it gets weird. They use knuckle bones from sheep or goats, shaped and marked differently on each side. No 2 sets are exactly alike. The point system is vague. Everyone insists they know the rules. No one actually does, except Rufus. You spot him immediately. Clean hands, immaculate tunic, and a smile that's 20% charm, 80%. I just watched you bet your sandals. He's not playing. He's watching, which means he's either the banker, the house, or the guy you'll be asking for a loan when your luck goes belly up. The game moves fast. Dice fly. Insults follow. One player throws a pair of 6s and shouts, "Venus, the best roll." Another groans, tosses a 1, and mutters something about divine punishment and bad fish. Coins are exchanged. Bread is wagered. One man offers a chicken. No one questions it. You're offered a chance to join. You hesitate because you don't know the rules. Your coin purse is already suspiciously light, and Rufus is watching you like a cat who knows exactly when you'll drop the fish. But you sit anyway. You throw. You win. You lose. You win again. You say something clever. The crowd laughs. You're now the guy with the lucky hand. And a stranger slaps your back so hard your kidneys question their existence. But here's the thing. This isn't just a game. In Rome, gambling is technically illegal, at least for money outside of Saturnalia, the chaotic December festival where everything goes delightfully off the rails. But much like modern office birthday cards that mysteriously contain $20 bills, the Romans found ways to bend the rules. Coins? Banned. Tokens that just happen to be the exact size, shape, and value of coins? Perfectly acceptable. Playing for favors, wine, or theoretical bread rights? Even better. The law is vague. The enforcement is vaguer. And as the stakes rise, so does the tension. One man accuses another of palming a die. A second swears his role was cursed by the gods. Rufus clears his throat. Silence. Then, like nothing happened, the game continues a little tenser, a little sweatier, a little closer to full-blown chaos. Because, of course, someone eventually flips the table. It's a time-honored tradition, right up there with shouting, "You'll regret this, Lucius," and storming off dramatically. The dice scatter. The crowd erupts. Someone blames Mercury. Someone else throws a fig. And then, like moths to chaos, the fists come out. Drunken brawls in Rome are about as common as togas and overcooked lentils. They start with a small shove, then a shout, and suddenly someone's swinging a clay jug like it's a gladiator's helmet. You duck. You weave. You consider whether this is the right moment to fake your own death and crawl home. Meanwhile, Rufus hasn't moved. Not once. He's still smiling, somehow now richer and even cleaner than before. No one touches him. Probably because he has friends. Probably because those friends are already closing in on the guy who spilled wine on Rufus's sandals. You survive. Barely. A man dressed like a philosopher but definitely not acting like one yells something about honor before falling into a stack of amphorae and passing out. The game, of course, resumes. Because the thing about dice games is they're addictive. And not just for the gambling, it's the adrenaline, the trash talk, the ridiculous luck, the temporary illusion that you can control fate with a lucky throw, and a mildly threatening glare at the bones. Even the Roman elite weren't immune. Emperor Claudius? Obsessed. He supposedly traveled with a custom-made gaming board so he could roll dice on the go. That's like bringing your poker set to funerals. Respect the hustle. You check your pouch. Empty. Your pride? Slightly bruised. Your sandals? One is missing. Probably bet it in a moment of wine-induced confidence. Worth it. As the crowd begins to thin, the laughter fades. The dice are still clacking, but now in a quieter rhythm, the sound of people chasing one last win before the sun rises and real life returns. You stand. Dust yourself off. Nod to Rufus. He nods back. It's unclear whether that was a warning or a thank you. Rome, after dark, is a place of risk and reward, and nowhere embodies that better than the dice game. You came with dreams, you leave with stories, and maybe a limp, but you were part of it. The noise, the thrill, the utter ridiculousness. And tomorrow, you'll be back, with new dice, a tighter grip on your coins, and a better lie about where your sandal went. Every friend group has one. In Rome, it's the guy who insists on playing the lyre after 4 cups of wine. No one asked. No one can stop him. You just smile and sip. Ah yes, him. The unofficial mascot of Roman social gatherings. The man, the myth, the minor chord menace. His lyre is always within arm's reach. He claims it relaxes him. He says things like, "Music is the wine of the soul," while actively ruining the vibe. And like a well-oiled mosaic of regret, he appears again. The night is going well. There's food. There's laughter. Someone just made a joke about senators and goat bribes. You're 3 cups of wine in and considering your life choices when he stands up, slowly, dramatically, and unrolls the cloth wrap around his lyre like it's the Ark of the Covenant. "Oh no," someone whispers. Too late. He's already plucking the first string. A sound that can only be described as angry bee trapped in a wooden box. He clears his throat, nods solemnly, and says, "This next one is inspired by the tragic beauty of the Tiber at dawn." No one knows what that means. Everyone is instantly filled with dread. His name is probably Aulus, or maybe Lucius. Something overly classical. He's always dressed one notch too formally, with a tunic that says, "I care about texture," and a laurel pin he insists was gifted to him by a poet of some repute. You once overheard him reciting Catullus to a potted plant, and now, in front of this captive audience of drunk senators, merchants, and people just trying to digest their snails, he begins. It starts slow. Minor chords, deep sighs, a flick of the wrist that suggests he's playing from his soul, not the sheet. You respect the passion, sort of. You sip your wine. A lot. Someone claps too early. Aulus nods, clearly mistaking it for encouragement. The tempo increases. He starts singing. or, more accurately, wailing. It's a love song, probably. Or a dirge. It's unclear. He rhymes Juno with Uno, and everyone politely pretends not to notice. A dog howls in the distance. Meanwhile, conversation dies. People try to look engaged while mentally checking out. One man stares into his bowl of figs like he's hoping to drown. A woman whispers, "If I fake a fainting spell, will he stop?" He will not, because for Liar Guy, this is not a performance. It is a moment. This is his arena, his hero's journey. And we are all unwilling extras in his self-produced off forum musical. There's always a second song. Always. This one, he announces, was composed during a thunderstorm last week. I felt the heavens speaking through me. Someone mutters, "I wish they'd stop." The second song is slower, moodier. He hums in a minor key. Someone sneezes. He glares. You swirl your wine and try to telepathically communicate with the gods to end this. But you can't be too hard on him, because here's the twist. Liar Guy is ancient Rome's universal constant. From countryside villas to smoky taverns, every group of Romans has one, the enthusiastic amateur musician, who means well but lacks both self-awareness and rhythm. It's tradition. It's heritage. It's survivable. Besides, his lyre isn't just a weapon of social disruption, it's also a symbol of status. Music was respected in Roman culture, especially among the elite. Educated Romans were expected to appreciate music, and some even learned to play instruments like the lyre or cithara to show off at dinner parties. Problem is, some people don't know when to stop, or that they were never good to begin with. You try to zone out, focus on something pleasant. The warmth of the wine, the soft flicker of oil lamps, the feeling of not being responsible for this public musical crisis. The song ends, kind of. He holds the final note longer than emotionally necessary. He looks up, breathless, expecting applause. You clap. Everyone claps. It's not for the performance, it's for survival. We lived through it. Together. He bows. One more? He asks. A collective shudder passes through the crowd. But before he can start again, the host intervenes. Perhaps a break, she says, with the forced cheerfulness of someone preventing a duel. Dessert is being served. A chorus of fake enthusiasm erupts. Dessert. Yes, dessert. Please, dessert. Liar Guy nods. Of course, I shall compose something for the honey cakes. You down your wine. And you reflect in all civilizations, across all time periods, one truth remains. There is always that one guy who brings the lyre. And we let him. Because deep down we know he means well. He just loves the music. He loves the moment. And maybe, just maybe, the night would feel a little less complete without one deeply awkward, emotionally confusing, vibrato-heavy ode to the river Tiber. So, you smile, you sip, you forgive, because tomorrow the lyre will be quiet. But tonight? Tonight it sings. It's midnight, and a man in sandals is loudly debating whether fate exists or if ducks have souls. You nod solemnly. You have no idea what he's saying. He doesn't either. Ah, the Roman night. A time for music, feasting, dice, maybe a quick brawl. And of course, deep existential conversations with a man who smells like wine and goat cheese. You've stumbled into one of the empire's most enduring cultural traditions, the drunken philosophical rant. It begins innocently enough. You're at a tavern, or a bathhouse, or sitting on a curb near a statue of Jupiter, holding a questionable snack and trying to remember where you left your dignity. Then he appears. Enter the philosophizer. He's usually barefoot, wearing a tunic that's halfway between loose and toga emergency. His beard? Overgrown. His breath? 60% wine, 40% conviction. He once studied under someone who claimed to have met a guy who was definitely influenced by a real philosopher. His voice? Loud. Always loud. He opens with a classic. But what is truth? Then immediately contradicts himself. Truth is nothing. Or perhaps everything. You nod. You sip. You consider running. He leans in. Intense. If time is a circle, then are we always late or always early? He looks at you like he's solved gravity. You pretend to think deeply while mentally reciting the alphabet backwards for sanity. This, friends, is symposiastic drunken rhetoricus, a well-documented phenomenon wherein someone with access to mediocre wine and a few vaguely remembered Plato quotes attempts to reinvent philosophy at 1 a.m. in a public forum, often without pants. And it's not new. Ancient Roman culture loved a good debate, preferably over wine, under the stars, and with just enough inebriation to confuse logic with dramatic flair. Even the Stoics occasionally went off script after 2 goblets and a bad date. The philosophizer is not alone. Soon, a rival appears. A man who insists that Epicurus was misunderstood and also possibly a Sagittarius. They square off. The air thickens. The tavern falls silent. You witness the Roman version of a podcast. 2 mildly drunk men shouting over each other about ethics, destiny, and whether fish feel shame. Here are some topics that might come up. Do the gods care what we do, or are they just really into watching people fall off ladders? If nothing is permanent, does that include my hangover? Is the universe random? Or did Jupiter personally ruin my week? Are dreams messages from the gods? Or just olives talking back? They pace, they quote, they misquote. One of them pulls out a scroll. It's blank, but he points at it dramatically, as if truth is written in invisible ink. Meanwhile, an audience has formed. Some are entertained, others are asleep. One man is using the debate as background noise to flirt with someone who's clearly regretting her life choices. And then it escalates. Someone smashes a wine cup for emphasis. Reality is subjective, he declares, while standing on a crate labeled, "Fish, probably still good." Another man joins in from across the street. "My uncle once met Seneca," he slurs. "He said logic is like soup." Confusion follows. Someone demands to know what kind of soup. Someone else claims that chicken broth disproves fate. At this point, you start to realize something beautiful. None of this matters, and that's the point. The drunken philosophical rant isn't meant to reach conclusions. It's not meant to change minds or win arguments. It's the verbal equivalent of interpretive dance with a wine buzz. A glorious, absurd ritual where humans try to grasp the cosmos with the same hands they just used to drop a fig into someone's sandal. It's community. It's culture. It's chaos in the shape of dialogue. And believe it or not, ancient texts even encouraged this. Plato's symposium is basically a dinner party, where everyone drinks too much and tries to sound wise. It's like an open mic night for thoughts no one asked for but everyone sort of enjoys. Even Cicero, famed orator, thinker, and guy who never used one word when 15 would do, reportedly enjoyed long discussions over wine, though in his case, discussion probably meant a 3-hour monologue, while everyone else just nodded and passed the olives. Eventually, the debate reaches a natural conclusion. Someone falls asleep mid-sentence. The others sigh. One man claims victory. Another burps in response. The crowd disperses. You finish your wine and look at the stars. Did you learn anything? Not really. But you felt things. Confusion, wonder, the fleeting sense that maybe ducks do have souls, and if they don't, they deserve one. And honestly, isn't that enough? Because the real joy of the Roman night isn't finding answers. It's asking ridiculous, impossible questions, with strangers who care just enough to yell, but not enough to fight. So the next time a man in sandals leans over and says, "But have you considered that we're all just shadows on the cave wall of existence?" Smile, nod, and prepare for the most confusing, delightful hour of your life. Because in Rome, philosophy doesn't live in scrolls or statues. It lives in the wine, the streets, and the glorious nonsense of midnight. You urgently need to go. You find a public toilet. You enter. You immediately regret it. The smell is its own entity. The sponge on a stick situation is complicated. You leave with less dignity than you entered. Welcome to the Latrina Publica, Rome's grand contribution to plumbing, public health, and nightmares you didn't know you could have. The marble might be cracked, the lighting non-existent, and the overall ambience? Somewhere between haunted bathhouse and olfactory betrayal. The Roman public toilet is, on paper, an architectural marvel, a triumph of engineering, water flow, and shared misery. But after dark, it becomes something else entirely. A testing ground. A gauntlet. A miniature coliseum where the opponent is your own survival instincts. It starts innocently enough. You drank too much wine, or had one fig too many, or made the tragic mistake of trying the house special fish stew at a papina near the docks. Regardless of what brought you here, your body has issued the evacuation order. You search the streets, ducking into alleys lit only by flickering torches and the quiet judgment of stray cats. Finally you find it. The public latrine. It's stone, rectangular, and far too open. You expect something a bit more private. Spoiler. Privacy is a modern invention. Inside, you're greeted by a room of smooth stone benches with holes carved at regular intervals. Underneath is a flowing water channel. No doors, no stalls. Just an endless row of strangers doing their business while making awkward eye contact. And the smell? It's biblical. A pungent blend of damp stone, stale urine, fermented humanity, and that ever-present waft of something unspeakable. It doesn't hit you immediately. It ambushes you. You cough, your eyes water. Your soul briefly considers leaving your body. But you're in too deep now. Literally and figuratively, you choose a spot. One far from the guy humming to himself, not too close to the suspicious puddle, and definitely not next to the man eating olives. What is he doing? Then comes the moment of truth, the sponge on a stick. Known as the tussorium, this community hygiene tool sits in a bucket of vinegar water. In theory, it's a clever Roman solution to personal sanitation. In practice, it's communal butt maintenance. It's the equivalent of sharing one sad, damp toothbrush with 30 strangers. You look at it, it looks at you. Neither of you is happy. You hesitate. You whisper a prayer to Fortuna, goddess of luck and lower intestinal peace. You do what you must. You try not to think about the fact that no one ever seems to change the vinegar, and just when you think it can't get worse, it does. From the shadows you hear skittering. You freeze. Because Rome, for all its glory, has a serious pest problem. Rats. Mice. Sometimes snakes. There's a reason people used to bring sticks into the latrine. Not for balance, for defense. You clench. You concentrate. You consider taking your chances with the Tiber. Meanwhile, conversations are happening all around you. Did you hear about Marcus's new chariot? No. But I heard his wife was seen with the baker. I think I stepped in something. These latrines aren't just bathrooms, they're social hubs. Romans didn't mind chatting while relieving themselves. Business deals were struck here. Gossip exchanged. Debates held. You sit silently, not contributing, because your only goal is to survive this ordeal with your dignity mostly intact and your toga unsoiled. Eventually, you finish. You stand. You don't look back. You shuffle over to the communal washing area, where water trickles through shallow stone channels. No soap, but maybe a splash and a whisper of hygiene. You glance at the tussorium one last time. It sits there, in its bucket, ready for the next victim. You nod respectfully. You've been through something together, and then you leave slightly damp, emotionally scarred, and vowing never to eat fish sauce again. The street air hits you like a blessing. Even the faint scent of manure feels like perfume compared to what you just endured. You inhale deeply. You're free, but not unmarked, because Rome's public toilets are more than just historical curiosities, they are character-building exercises. You haven't just used the restroom. You've emerged from a trial, a test of courage, composure, and glute strength. You look up at the stars, wondering how the same civilization that gave us aqueducts and philosophy also said, "Let's make strangers share a sponge." And somehow, it worked. Rome's sewage system, as horrifying as the user experience was one of the most advanced of its time. They had drainage, running water, piping, everything except personal space. And let's be clear, this wasn't just for the poor. Even emperors had to contend with questionable public hygiene. The only real difference? Wealthy citizens had private toilets, still stone benches, still holes, just with slightly better lighting and fewer rats. You continue your walk through the moonlit city, steps lighter, conscience cleansed, or at least disinfected by trauma. Somewhere, you hear a lyre. Someone shouts about fate. A dice game erupts in cheers. Rome continues. Loud, smelly, brilliant, and absurd. But you? You just survived the real Colosseum. And you didn't even need a gladiator's helmet, just a strong stomach, and the will to pretend the sponge was fine. At night, the forum becomes quiet mostly. A few linger, sharing the latest gossip. Who cheated on whom, who bribed which magistrate, and who's been cursed by an ex over bad lentils. You find yourself standing in the heart of the Roman Empire, the Forum. By day, it's chaos incarnate. Merchants yelling about olives, orators yelling about justice, beggars yelling about everything else. But at night, the Forum changes. The crowds fade, the marble cools, and the statues now looming. Silent witnesses somehow manage to look even more judgmental in moonlight. It's quiet. Not silent, though. Rome never does silence. Somewhere, footsteps echo between columns. A stray dog trots past, carrying something that is either a chicken leg or a small scandal. A few braziers still glow, casting flickers of light across the carved faces of long-dead senators who definitely bribed someone to get on a coin. You're not alone. A few locals have gathered in a dim corner of the Forum. They sit in a loose circle, wine cups in hand, voices low. You wander over and hover near the edge because nothing says, "This is going to be good," like whispering Romans holding wine and secrets. Tonight's topics? A little bit of everything. First up, gossip. Apparently, Gaius the merchant has been seen leaving Flavia's house far too late for it to be about grain prices. His wife is away visiting family, which everyone knows is code for hiding until the screaming stops. Someone snorts into their wine. Then there's talk of Rufus, who was caught bribing a magistrate with an entire basket of imported figs and a small statue of Minerva. Bold move. Especially since the magistrate is allergic to figs. They say he broke out in hives mid-sentence. Everyone laughs except the one man who's suddenly very quiet. Suspiciously fig-shaped guilt? Perhaps. And then, as if summoned by the moon itself, the conversation turns to ghosts. Because midnight in the Forum isn't just about earthly drama, it's about the otherworldly too. Rome may be a city of marble and military might, but it is also a city of deeply superstitious night owls. One woman swears she saw the spirit of her grandmother last week, hovering near the temple of Vesta, tesking about her choice in sandals. Another man claims he heard a whisper in his ear while walking past the Curia. Something about taxes, or maybe tacos. Latin ghosts are hard to understand. A new storyteller takes the floor. He's older, wearing a cloak that has definitely seen some things. He clears his throat and says, "There was once a senator who cheated so many people out of land, they buried him under it." Everyone leans in. Each year, on the anniversary of his death, you can hear him moaning about property lines and municipal zoning. Someone gasps. Someone else whispers, "Classic senator." Another tale begins this one, about a woman who cursed her ex-lover with an offering of rotten lentils and a poem so bitter it made crops wilt. The punchline? He married a woman named Lentilla. Now, whenever he eats legumes, he breaks out in boils. Coincidence? Not in Rome. In this city, curses are currency. The Romans believed in magic, omens, and revenants, restless spirits doomed to haunt the places they once loved or loathed. To die without proper burial? A surefire way to end up as a local haunting. To be betrayed in love or debt. Also a haunting candidate. To lie too much in court? The ghosts queue up to visit you personally, and where better to hear them than the Forum, a place layered with centuries of speeches, arguments, executions, deals, and dramatic exits. Every paving stone has heard something scandalous. Every column has watched someone fake cry for political gain. It's no wonder people gather here at night, to listen, to remember, to share secrets under the stars where the marble can't talk but definitely judges. You sip your wine and look around. The group has grown. A few new faces. A couple of children, wide-eyed and clinging to older siblings. One man keeps nervously glancing at a statue of Jupiter, as if it might suddenly wink. You're pulled into another tale, this one about a charioteer who died mid-race, but whose ghost kept finishing laps. They had to replace the track stones because the haunting was scaring the horses. The moral of the story? Never borrow money from a ghost or a charioteer. The night stretches on. Someone pulls out a lyre. Not that guy, this one just plucks quietly, providing a soundtrack to the chaos. A gentle rhythm to stories about betrayal, forbidden love, and the occasional goat spirit. And strangely, it's peaceful. This, you realize, is how Romans wind down. Not with quiet reflection or gentle music, but with wine-soaked stories about unfaithful senators and the ghosts they left behind. It's catharsis with a side of paranoia. Eventually, the group thins. People drift off into the night. One man stays behind to argue softly with a statue about the afterlife. You leave him to it. You understand. As you walk away from the forum, the whispers still swirl in your ears. Gossip, curses, laughter, and maybe, just maybe, the sound of a sandal scuffing behind you when no one's there. You don't look back. In Rome, some stories follow you home. The streets aren't lit. Not really. You carry an oil lamp that drips and sputters. Every shadow looks suspicious. Every alley has a story. You walk fast. It's probably fine. Probably. Nightfall in Rome isn't for the faint of heart. Sure, the wine's been poured, the lyres have been played, badly, and the bathhouse has been survived with only minor psychological damage. But now comes the final test of your evening, getting home. You step into the street, holding your oil lamp at arm's length like it's a shield against both darkness and disappointment. It sputters with every gust of wind, dripping hot wax onto your wrist. You flinch, but silently accept that pain is now part of your journey. There are no streetlights. Not really. The Romans didn't do night lighting beyond the occasional torch or brazier outside a tavern. So unless you've paid a servant to walk in front of you with a proper lantern, or you are that servant, you're navigating the city by a flickering glow and sheer emotional commitment. Every step echoes. Cobblestones are uneven. Puddles hide themselves until it's too late. The air is thick with the scent of smoke, spilled wine, and whatever died in the gutter 2 days ago. And then, of course, there are the shadows. Rome by night is full of them. Long, narrow alleys between crumbling buildings, shrouded doorways, unexplained rustling behind carts. Every corner seems to whisper, "You shouldn't be here." Every alley seems to promise either treasure or trauma, possibly both. You pass a man muttering to himself in the shadow of a column. He could be drunk. He could be a philosopher. He could be both. You don't ask. You walk faster. One alley up ahead is rumored to be haunted by the ghost of a butcher who lost his cleaver and his temper. Another supposedly leads to a secret gambling den where losers mysteriously disappear. You choose the main road instead, which just means it's slightly less likely to contain someone trying to sell you a stolen chicken. You clutch your lamp tighter and keep walking. A woman scurries past, clutching a bundle of herbs and muttering a prayer. A group of rowdy young men emerges from a popinah, singing a song with lyrics that would make Bacchus blush. You pretend not to hear the part about someone's sister and a goat. Now and then, you see glimmers of other lamps bobbing through the dark, fellow travelers trying not to step in mystery puddles or get lured into someone's bad idea. You nod politely as you pass. Shared suffering builds silent solidarity, but the real stars of the Roman night streets are the noises. A door creaks. A dog barks. Somewhere, metal clinks. Somewhere else, a baby wails, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone loudly regretting wine choices. And above it all, the occasional shout of a vigil, Rome's grumpy night watchman, yelling something about curfew, theft, or an improperly tethered mule. Your pace quickens. Because, statistically speaking, night in Rome is when the weird stuff happens. Robberies, common. Street brawls, frequent. Mysterious disappearances, unspoken, but heavily implied in every neighborhood whisper. That's why people carry charms, little amulets blessed by local priests, meant to ward off evil, bad luck, or excessively clingy exes. Do they work? Who knows? But they jingle when you walk, and that's comforting. You glance at your lamp. It's getting lower. The oil's nearly gone. You pick up the pace, muttering to yourself about how next time you're staying at a friend's place even if their floor smells like cheese and disappointment. Then, in the distance, Your building. Home. Sweet. Crumbling. Possibly rat-infested home. You dodge one final suspicious puddle, nod to a stray cat who may or may not be a deity in disguise, and finally reach your insula. You exhale. You made it. All limbs intact. Dignity only moderately bruised. You push open the creaky door and step inside. It's dark, of course. The stairs are a health hazard. Someone is cooking something that smells like boiled socks, but you've survived the Roman night streets. And that, truly, is cause for celebration. Because in ancient Rome, walking home in the dark isn't just about getting home, it's about navigating the labyrinth of danger, superstition, and absurdity with nothing but a sputtering lamp and the raw determination to not be that person who ends up cursed, robbed, or in a stranger's poetry scroll tomorrow morning. So you hang up your tunic, blow out your lamp, and thank whatever household gods you keep on the shelf, even if one of them is just a nicely shaped rock you talk to when you're lonely. Outside, the night rolls on. Someone sings, someone screams, someone shouts, "I told you the goat wasn't mine." But none of it matters now. You made it through the shadows, and you didn't even drop your lamp. Eventually, you stumble home or to wherever you pass out. Romans didn't sleep all night. They slept in phases, waking midnight for snacks, bathroom breaks, or existential dread. You join the tradition proudly. You've made it. After a long night of wine, philosophy, questionable fish sauce, and narrowly avoiding a sponge on a stick incident, you collapse onto something vaguely soft and slightly clean. It might be a straw mattress. It might be a borrowed toga. Honestly, it might be a decorative rug that looked inviting at the time. It doesn't matter. You're horizontal. That's good enough. Welcome to the first sleep. Or as the Romans knew it, initium somni, the beginning of your night's rest. See, in ancient Rome, people didn't sleep in one big block. They slept in segments, kind of like a human version of software updates. You'd conk out for a few hours, wake up in the middle of the night, do a little thinking, pacing, or snacking, and then go back to bed for second sleep, a tradition that makes 3 a.m. fridge raids feel practically historical. The room is quiet. Sort of. You live in an insula, a Roman apartment complex made of dreams, wood, and extremely flammable plaster. Through the walls, you can hear your neighbor loudly regretting that 6th cup of wine. Someone upstairs drops something. It sounds heavy. You assume it's either a jug or a person. Either way, you're too tired to investigate. You try to sleep, but your brain? Nope. It's busy. Did I really tell that story about the haunted chicken again? Was that liar guy staring at me the whole time? Am I cursed? Or just dehydrated? Welcome to midnight Roman existential dread. It's like modern anxiety, but with more togas and fewer therapy options. You roll over. The straw pokes you in places straw should not poke. You rearrange your tunic into something less wedgie-prone. Outside, a dog barks. A vigil yells something about curfew violators and goat-related fines. Classic. You stare into the darkness and think about life, fate, and whether ducks have souls, a callback to that philosopher shouting near the forum earlier. He might have had a point. Or he might have been hallucinating. Hard to say. Eventually, the internal monologue quiets. You drift back into sleep, but not for long. Because now, it's pee time. Roman homes didn't have ensuite bathrooms. If you were wealthy, you might have a chamber pot. If you weren't, you had options. Go outside, find a bucket, or brave the communal toilet again, a thought so horrifying you immediately develop bladder willpower. You settle for quietly stepping over your snoring roommate and using the pot in the corner. It's not glamorous. It's not even sanitary. But it's traditional. You try not to spill. You mostly succeed. After this noble act of midnight survival, you consider going back to bed. But no. Now you're hungry. Enter the midnight Roman snack. You rummage through a basket of leftovers. A handful of olives. Half a fig. Something that looks like bread but smells like a dare. You nibble. You wince. You eat it anyway. Hunger is stronger than standards. You sit near a tiny oil lamp, gnawing your late-night fig like a philosophical raccoon, and watch the flickering flame cast weird shadows on the wall. You start naming them. That one looks like Bacchus. That one like your mother-in-law. That one moves. You decide it's just the wine. By now, your body is begging for second sleep. And unlike the anxious toss and turn of the first round, this one is deeper, weirder, full of strange dreams, where you're running through the forum chased by a chicken with a scroll that reads, "Taxes are due." You jolt awake briefly, not from fear, but from the roof, creaking under the weight of someone doing whatever ancient Romans did at 3:45 a.m., probably dancing, or regretting. You fall back asleep. And finally, around dawn, you wake up for good. Slowly, creakily, you sit up, brush the straw from your tunic, and try to remember whether you dreamed about your ex, a centurion, or a loaf of talking bread. It doesn't matter. You survived another Roman night, and you followed the ancient routine to the letter. Segmental sleep, internal panic, a bathroom crisis, a snack, weird dreams, and eventually sweet oblivion. Sleep wasn't some luxurious, 8-hour uninterrupted spa session. It was patchy, uncomfortable, and constantly interrupted by noise, digestion, and fear of hauntings. But somehow, it worked, because Romans knew something we often forget. Sleep isn't perfect. It's messy, chaotic, and deeply human. Like life, and like Rome itself. So as you blink into the rising sunlight, with a mouth that tastes like vinegar and bad choices, you stretch your arms, yawn dramatically, and prepare for another day of surviving this absurd empire. And you say proudly, "Sleep? That's a tomorrow problem." You wake up with a pounding head, a crusty toga, and a strong sense that you owe someone money. No Advil, no brunch, just more pottage and judgment. Welcome to ancient Rome's version of the morning after. There are no iced oat milk lattes, no greasy breakfast sandwiches, no text from your friend saying, "You were hilarious last night," followed by ominous ellipses. Just you, a splitting headache, and the unpleasant sensation that you may have challenged a senator to a duel over cheese. Your eyes open slowly. The light is offensive. Your mouth is dry. Not just "I need water" dry, but "Did someone line my gums with chalk and betrayal?" dry. You sit up and realize two things at once. Your back is in open rebellion, and your toga has developed a personality. It's stiff. It's crusted with something. You hope it's wine. You vaguely remember singing, then dancing, then aggressively quoting Virgil to a donkey, then the donkey quoting you back. That might have been a dream, or maybe it was Brutus again. That guy loves a dramatic reenactment. What you do know is that you're now in the brutal hangover phase that Roman medical texts referred to as consequita miseria post hilaritatem. Misery follows hilarity. And they weren't wrong. The Romans had an impressive tolerance for bad wine and worse mornings. But their solutions? Let's just say the modern age really nailed the whole "let's just drink water and lie very still" thing. You shuffle toward the communal jug of water in your home, which may or may not still be potable. You drink. It helps a little. Then you spot your breakfast. A sad bowl of pottage, which is basically oatmeal's sketchy cousin. Barley, lentils, maybe some herbs if you're lucky, and absolutely no apology from the universe for what it's doing to your skull. You eat it anyway. It's hot, it's bland. It makes you feel like a functional organism. Barely. If you were rich, you could hire someone to mix you a hangover remedy, some kind of herbal concoction with ingredients like coriander, myrrh, and possibly more wine. Yes, the Roman cure for a wine-induced disaster was, often, more wine. This explains many things about Roman history. Another favorite remedy? Cabbage. Raw, boiled, pickled, whatever form it came in, cabbage was the hangover MVP. Pliny the Elder swore by it. He also swore a lot of things, including that garlic cures leprosy and that beards attract lightning, so maybe take it with a pinch of salt, which incidentally was also considered medicinal. You lie back down, try to sleep it off. But Rome doesn't care that you're fragile. Outside your window, a vendor is screaming about figs. A dog is barking at a wall. Someone is dragging a cart that sounds like it's being powered by vengeance and square wheels. And your neighbor is arguing loudly about whether or not his wife cursed his sandals. The walls are thin. Your head is thick. You groan. Eventually you muster the courage to rise fully. You splash water on your face using a ceramic basin that somehow manages to both be too cold and not refreshing. You stare into a polished bronze mirror. You look like you've just returned from war. You kind of have. You wander outside, searching for air and forgiveness. The sun is higher than expected, which means you've missed your early chores. Someone's already sweeping the street. Another man waves at you and says, "Rough night?" You nod. He offers you a chunk of stale bread. You accept it like a sacred offering. There's no shame in it. Romans partied hard, and everyone knew what a wine hangover looked like. Red eyes, shuffling gait, suspicious stain on the tunic, and the general demeanor of a disappointed statue. You think briefly about bathing. Maybe the thermae would help public baths, warm pools, cold plunges. The Romans swore by the alternating temperature method, which sounds scientific until you remember it was invented by a man named Publius, who once fell asleep in a fountain. You decide to try it. The bathhouse is loud, steamy, and full of people talking about politics, love affairs, and someone's missing goat. Again. You soak, you sweat. You emerge slightly more human. And now comes the final test. Getting through the rest of the day. There is no time for self-pity in Rome. You've got things to do, places to go, people to pretend to listen to while silently cursing fermented grapes. So you do what all Romans do. Power through it with grit, a tunic that smells like regret, and a stubborn refusal to die of embarrassment. You walk back home in the midday heat, hoping you didn't promise to host a dinner party, or recite poetry, or join a military campaign. You mentally retrace your steps. Something about ducks, something about philosophy. You vow never to drink again. Everyone vows this. No one means it, because eventually the wine will return, the lyre will play, the forum will buzz, and you'll raise a cup, toast to the gods, and forget for a few hours that tomorrow morning will bring you right back here, to this moment, to the pottage, to the headache, to the very Roman art of suffering stylishly. Dogs bark, a drunk man sings, a cart rattles by. Somewhere, a baby cries. The city never really sleeps, it just murmurs in Latin. Sleep in ancient Rome is an aspirational concept, something whispered about in philosophy scrolls, but rarely experienced in practice. The city isn't built for quiet. It hums, groans, creaks, burps. It's a living, breathing machine made of stone, steam, and people with no volume control. You lie in your creaky bed, or, more accurately, on a pile of straw that sounds like it's about to unionize and stare at the ceiling, wondering if the wooden beams above you will hold, or if tonight is the night gravity makes its final argument. Outside your window, the concert begins. First, it's the dogs. Not just one or two noble hounds. We're talking about the full canine symphony orchestra with a section for soloists, yappers, barkers, howlers, and that one raspy-voiced mutt who sounds like he smokes garum-scented cigars. Then comes the singing. It always starts the same. A lone man with a slightly too high voice belting out what may have once been a love ballad. The pitch is questionable. The lyrics are forgotten. The passion, however, is undeniable. You're not sure if he's serenading a woman, a wall, or his own reflection in a puddle. A cart rattles by. Not in a passing gently on a moonlit roadway. No. This cart sounds like it's made of forks, regret, and loose bricks. Every wheel squeaks on its own schedule. Whatever it's carrying is heavy and unbalanced, which adds a delightful clunk-thud rhythm to the night's soundtrack. You close your eyes. Then a baby cries. You don't know whose baby. Possibly upstairs. Possibly next door. Possibly left on your roof by Jupiter as some kind of moral test. The cry is piercing, intermittent, desperate. A tiny, relentless reminder that silence is for the weak and childless. And through it all, there's chatter. Voices float in from nearby windows and alleyways. Someone is arguing over figs. Another person is whispering sweet nothings to what sounds like a goat. Someone else is telling a story for the third time, and based on the groans of their listeners, it hasn't gotten better with repetition. The forum may be quieter now. The market's closed. The temple's locked, but Rome itself? She's just whispering instead of shouting. Even the buildings make noise. The wooden floors above you creak like they're stretching. Stone walls groan as they cool. Somewhere in the shadows, Something mouse, lizard. God knocks something over, and you pretend it didn't happen. That's a problem for daylight. You try to sleep, but the city won't let you. A man stumbles down your street, clearly fresh from the bathhouse or a tavern, depending on whether that's steam or shame, clinging to his toga. He's muttering in Latin, not elegant Latin, slurred, fish sauce-laced Latin that loosely translates to, "She never appreciated me, and also I forgot my sandals." A neighbor slams a shutter. A cat shrieks in protest. Somewhere, a donkey makes a sound that absolutely no one warned you a donkey could make. This isn't noise, this is texture. Rome doesn't believe in peaceful silence. It believes in character, personality, chaos with acoustics. You flip your pillow. It's straw. Straw is always warm, always crunchy, never helpful. Then, as if by divine intervention, it quiets. Just for a moment. The wind shifts. The dogs have moved on to bark at new evils. The singing man has either passed out or been paid to stop. The baby has chosen mercy. You take a deep breath. And in that stillness, you hear the real sounds of Rome at night. The faint burble of an aqueduct in the distance. The gentle crackle of a torch. The rustle of ivy brushing stone. The rhythm of your own breath, syncing with a city that, while never truly asleep, is willing to let you rest for a few sacred minutes. You begin to doze. Then a chicken falls off a balcony. There's a squawk, a crash. Someone screams. A door opens. A man yells, "Not again!" followed by the distinct thump of a broom hitting something it shouldn't. You sigh. Rome strikes again. But somehow, you don't mind. Because beneath the madness, the sleeplessness, and the clanging of carts comes something oddly comforting, the realization that everyone's in it together. No one is sleeping well. Everyone's tossing, turning, muttering, and suffering equally. Whether you're a baker or a senator, you still have to deal with loud goats and unpredictable plumbing. The sounds of the Roman night aren't interruptions, they're reminders that the empire is alive, that the people are stubborn, that even the gods probably get woken up by distant donkey screams. So you nestle deeper into your straw, cover your ears with one corner of your toga, and let the lullaby of late-night Rome wash over you. It's not peaceful, it's not quiet, but it's home. Dawn creeps in. The torches burn low. The lyre finally goes silent. The wine has run out. Rome stretches, belches, and prepares to start again. And you? You survived Roman nightlife. Barely. Congratulations. You've made it to morning in Rome, which, despite popular belief, is not marked by a tranquil sunrise and birdsong. It's marked by someone vomiting in an alley, a rooster screaming into the void, and the entire city smelling like a combination of boiled lentils and decisions no one is proud of. You blink at the faint light filtering in through your window, or, if you're particularly unlucky, through a hole in the wall that used to be a window before someone's donkey kicked it in during a particularly animated game of dice. The torches outside are guttering now, smoky shadows dancing across cracked stone. Someone forgot to put one out properly, and now it's dripping like a flaming candle that deeply regrets its choices. That's fair. So do you. The lyre player that one man determined to be the ancient equivalent of a guy with an acoustic guitar at a house party has finally passed out. Probably in the street. Possibly mid-chord. A few people stepped over him on their way home and whispered, "Not again," in Latin. And the wine? Gone. Drained. Absorbed into tunics, gossip, and memory. A few broken amphorae litter the tavern floors like confetti after a gladiator-themed wedding. You sit up. Or attempt to. Your body stages a protest. Your joints sound like someone trying to fold a breadstick. Your head feels like it's been used as a percussion instrument by an angry child. Your stomach is undecided about its future, but the city is already waking. You can hear it in the clatter of early carts full of bread, bricks, or whatever it is the baker's apprentice forgot yesterday. A merchant is already yelling about olives. Someone's arguing with their wife. Someone else is arguing with Jupiter, loudly and with hand gestures. A rooster crows. Once. Twice. A third time for emphasis. It's not even your rooster. No one owns this rooster. It belongs to the city, and its only job is to scream every morning like it's personally offended by your existence. You shuffle toward a basin of water. Splash your face. Stare into a piece of polished bronze that's trying its best to be a mirror. What looks back at you is technically human. Messy hair, wild eyes, a piece of lentil stuck to your cheek. But you're here. You made it. Some people are still staggering home, toga dragging, sandals missing, dignity left behind somewhere near the forum. One man passes you carrying what looks suspiciously like a statue's hand. He gives you a knowing nod. You nod back. You both understand the unspoken rule. What happens in the Popina stays between you, Bacchus, and the city's most judgmental stray cat. The streets begin to clear the evidence. Tavern owners sweep out the remnants of the night. Someone is trying to wash mysterious stains off a bench, using more hope than water. The smell of garum still lingers, Rome's favorite fermented fish sauce, which always seems to smell stronger after the party is over. You pass a man sleeping under a statue of Minerva, arm around a broken amphora like it's a date that ditched him. You briefly wonder if he's alive. Then he snores. Good enough. And slowly, like a giant groggy beast, Rome begins to reset. Work resumes. Bakers roll dough. Vendors shout again, louder this time, to compete with the Roosters' encore performance. Politicians strut toward the forum, rehearsing their speeches under their breath, ignoring the purple grape stains on their togas. The city has no shame. It has no pause button. It simply presses on. And you, wobbling slightly and chewing the last bite of a regretful fig, realize something else. This isn't just nightlife. This is life, Roman style. Loud, chaotic, slightly fermented, and fueled by stubbornness, social climbing, and fermented everything. You remember last night like a fever dream, the street performers, the bathhouse philosophers, the pickup lines that sounded like haikus written during a head injury, the guy with the dice, the singing slaves, the suspiciously aggressive fish sauce. You remember laughing, crying, nearly falling into a fountain. You remember someone yelling, "This is the best night of my life," and another person replying, "It's Tuesday." And somehow, that makes it better. Because Roman nightlife wasn't polished. It wasn't filtered, or elegant, or carefully curated for public approval. It was raw, honest, wild, and deeply, unapologetically human. You survived it. You tripped through alleyways, dodged curses and goats, lost at dice, got lectured by a lyre player, and possibly danced with a senator's nephew. You avoided arrest, mostly. You may or may not now be engaged. You'll figure that out later. But for now, the sun is up, the hangover has arrived, and Rome rolls on. And you? You did it. You lived through the night. And somehow, despite everything, the fish sauce, the ghosts, the sponge on a stick, you kind of want to do it again. And so, as the Roman sun begins to rise and you peel your wine-stained toga off the floor, take a moment to appreciate just how utterly weird and weirdly human ancient nightlife really was. You survived an evening in Rome. You drank questionable wine, dodged flying lyres, made awkward eye contact in a public toilet, and listened to a man debate the soul of ducks. You've seen the chaos of a Popina, the decadence of a banquet, and the quiet hush of a city that only pretends to sleep. Was it glamorous? Not really. Was it dangerous? Absolutely. Was it hilarious, absurd, and strangely familiar? Completely. Because Roman nightlife wasn't that different from today's. People drank too much, stayed out too late, made bad decisions involving poetry, and tried desperately to look cool while tripping over their sandals. And just like you, they probably woke up the next day thinking, "I'm never doing that again," only to do it again the very next night. So tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, surrounded by modern silence, or a white noise fan and a deeply judgmental cat, maybe whisper a little thank you to the past, for its parties, its chaos, its resilience, because history, even in its wildest, drunkest moments, reminds us that humans have always just wanted a good night out, a warm place to sleep, and maybe someone to listen to their lyre solo. Sleep well, time traveler. You made it through ancient Rome with all your fingers and most of your dignity intact. Now close your eyes and dream in Latin